Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 311, Man in the Tree. I can't believe a word that Qin Brat says. Pan Gong Tso's fury couldn't be contained. He entered a random room while shouting sternly, "Where's the working together? What about being friends on the ship and enemies after disembarking? Liar. Running away when you meet something good and even hogging it for yourself. Stuff yourself to death. You bastard." When he was behind Qin Mu, he had clearly seen Qin Mu close the door as he was entering the mysterious room. It wasn't the door that had shut automatically, but Qin Mu who closed the door to use the spell of space integration on the ship to block him. The brat had clearly decided to hog everything for himself. Pan Gong Tso quickly calmed down and calculated the second layer of spell of space integration. He said coldly, "Since I already know that there's a second layer of space, I can easily calculate where that long corridor is, so you can forget about hogging it by yourself." He started calculating as he opened room after room to search for his subordinates. However, there were too many rooms in this ship and his subordinates had long lost their way, going from one room to another. They tried to find a way out only to go in deeper and deeper. Pan Gong Tso had already found the method of solving the outer layer of the spell of integration, but he still spent quite some time to find his people. He even met the two bats and the dragon Qilin on the way. The dragon Qilin was actually trying to calculate the method for the spell of integration and had almost found the location of the bridge. The two sides fought a fierce battle. Pan Gong Tso and the rest suffered a massive defeat, but luckily a shaman king barged into the room at that moment and managed to save Pan Gong Tso and the rest. When they found the other shaman kings, Pan Gong Tso still couldn't find the location of the long corridor, making him feel even a stronger sense of defeat. "It's fine even if I can't find that place, since that Qin brat will definitely come back. I'll just take him down then and force him to hand over the silver helmet and spit out all the secrets." In the room at the end of the long corridor, Qin Mu blinked his eyes innocently. He had deliberately shut Pan Gong Tso out. The whole journey, the old man had led him to discover the secret of this ship, and since he was about to find the secret, there was no need for Pan Gong Tso to stay behind him to be a nuisance. His aim in agreeing to ally with Pan Gong Tso was to push Pan Gong Tso out to tank damage for him in times of danger. Once there was no longer any danger, it was natural that he should kick Pan Gong Tso out. "Grandmaster, you must have thought about this as well, right? But I'm still a little superior." He turned around and examined his surroundings. He was in an unimaginable room. It was similar to Bent Mountain Shrine that he had seen underwater, which was outrageously vast. It was close to 10 miles wide, so it was like a small world hidden in the ship that was a little smaller than Bent Mountain Shrine. However, this room was much bigger than the treasured ship, so to hide such a large space within it was truly inconceivable. Qin Mu raised his head to take a look and the sky, which was constructed from long sticks of wood. The one in Bent Mountain Shrine was constructed from the bones of a Taotai divine beast, so the two were different. The inner body of a Taotai divine beast naturally had a vast space, so the shrine only needed to be constructed outside the bones. The space inside it would then naturally become vast. However, the space in this room was forged by using great magic power and divine arts to warp space. This method was much more difficult. In the center of this vast and spectacular room was an incomparably huge tree that reached the sky. The roots on the ground coiled and snaked around like dragons, giving off an ancient feeling. Glowing lights flowed through the body of the huge tree from the roots to the sky. The glow shone continuously and lighted up the entire room. The glowing lights seemed to have rune markings flowing inside them as they flowed below the bark of the tree toward the sky and the surroundings of the room. They entered the body of the ship. The sound of a heartbeat came from the body of the tree after some time, giving off a deafening boom. Qin Mu examined the tree with a look of doubt. The ship was constructed around an unimaginably huge and ancient tree. The long pieces of wood in the sky had to be its branches. Furthermore, from the flowing light and the heartbeat that came from the tree trunk, the ancient tree was still alive and acting as the core of the treasured ship. It could even be said to be the source of its power. However, how many years must it have taken for such a huge tree to grow? Why did this ancient tree have such tremendous power which could be used to move the treasured ship and sustain it for a long journey? As expected, the bridge and the silver-colored helmet aren't really used to control the treasured ship. This is. Qin Mu's gaze landed on the ground, and it was bright and clean as a mirror. The elder from the painting was sticking to the floor and waved at him before running forward. Qin Mu hurriedly caught up with him with endless curiosity. Was this old man from the painting painted out? This kind of path of painting seems to be slightly superior to Grandpa Def's. Even though Grandpa Def's paintings can bestow a divine soul to a dot using mutual sensitivity, his paintings that come to life don't last long before turning back into ink. On the other hand, this old man from the painting looks like a living and breathing being. Besides him only being able to travel through the walls, there's little difference between him and normal life forms. In the world, is there really a person whose painting path is superior to that of Grandpa Def? Impossible! He instantly thought of the key point. The person who had drawn the old man from the painting might not have surpassed Def in the painting path. Instead, they surpassed him in the path of creation. This person had drawn the old man and bestowed life to him using the path of creation, bringing the old man from the painting to life so he would become a secret guardian and guide. Def's painting didn't rely on cultivation, but on his attainments in his painting path. Qin Mu caught up to the old man from the painting that was sprinting to the ancient tree in the center. As he was about to get near, he frowned slightly. He saw that the bright and clean floor was once again covered in a pile of green sticky liquid, as if something had crawled past the floor. The closer Qin Mu got to the ancient tree, the more of the green sticky liquid he saw. The old man from the painting had also become more careful, avoiding the sticky liquid as he closed in on the ancient tree. Qin Mu sized up the surroundings with alertness. This place was very vast, but after looking around, he saw nothing that was terrifying. However, the sticky liquid unnerved him. He had seen it on the deck of the ship, and that was when he had encountered the Devil Qi invasion which had flooded towards them. There had been a terrifying entity hidden in that Devil Qi. The room before entering the long corridor had also been covered in this kind of liquid. Now that it was all over the place, it meant that the ancient tree was of extreme importance to the owner of the sticky liquid. Qin Mu looked around, and his uneasiness grew. The more he looked, the more he felt like this was a nest, the nest of the sticky liquid's owner. Finally, Qin Mu reached the bottom of the tree following the old man. When he got there, he was slightly stunned. He saw the man in white that he had seen in the illusion. To be exact, he only saw his face. The owner of the treasured ship, the man in white that had the surname Qin and had come from Carefree Village, had merged with the ancient tree, becoming one with it. Only his face was shown on the outside, and even it was not fully revealed. It had nearly completely merged with the ancient tree, and his eyes were lifeless. The heartbeat that rang out before had to be his heart beating very slowly. Qin Mu was stunned. The man in white had to have used some unique method to extend his life by merging himself with the tree and linking their lives. However, the disadvantage of this method was extremely huge, as it would make one become part of the tree, unable to move and even slowly turn into a tree. The person's injury had to have been extremely severe, so severe that he couldn't endure it any longer. He had gotten chased by his enemies all the way to this place. He got rid of all of them, but he had no choice but to execute a forbidden skill to transform himself into a part of the ancient tree to live on. Qin Mu looked at him, and the eyes of the man in white began to open with difficulty. They were like two eyeballs sculpted into the wood, barely able to see an unclear image ahead of them. Was it you who had this old man from the painting guide me here? Qin Mu felt that this man was indescribably familiar, and there seemed to be a connection between them. This made his heart stir uncontrollably, and he asked, "Are you called Qin Fengqing? Are you from Carefree Village?" The man in the tree seemed to slowly get a clearer view of his face and become slightly excited. He opened his mouth with difficulty, but the tongue had already turned into wood, so he couldn't make a sound. Qin Mu was stunned. The drawback of this kind of forbidden skill was too strong. Even though the life of the man in white was extended, his senses and his body functions were all mostly lost. "Do you recognize this jade pendant?" Qin Mu hurriedly plucked the jade pendant from his neck and pushed it in front of the man while suppressing the excitement in his heart. Do you recognize it? This was inside my swaddle, and I've always kept it with me. Is this Qin word the Qin word of Carefree Village? The man in white became even more excited, and the ancient tree trembled. It seemed like the man in the tree was struggling to break free from the restraints and grab the jade pendant with his hand. Rings and rings of light flowed down the trunk of the tree and suppressed his struggle. He opened his mouth, seeming to have a lot of things he wanted to tell Qin Mu, but he couldn't say a word. Qin Mu's expression turned dull. He seemed to be talking to the man in the tree and also to himself as he muttered, I've heard from Granny that there was the corpse of a woman who'd carried the basket and sent me into disabled elderly village in great ruins. I met her under the river, but no matter what, I couldn't see her clearly. I only have this jade pendant which I've been wearing ever since I was young, and I always keep hoping to find where I've come from, if my family is still there. He sat down under the tree with his arms hugging his knees. On his fingertip hung the jade pendant which swung to and fro. I feel like my parents could still be alive and waiting for me to find them. I've never met them before. A little girl who had become the sun guardian told me that I may be from Carefree Village, so I tried my best to go there. I scouted out news of Carefree Village and tried to find the path there, but I've failed over and over again. I even implicated village chief and the rest, which almost resulted in all of them dying because of me. I didn't tell them about this place this time because I was afraid of implicating them again. Qing Fengqing, you're called Qing Fengqing, right? I found you, but I didn't expect that you wouldn't be able to tell me anything. Is it really that hard to go home and learn about one's birth? He buried his face in his arms and didn't say another word. Drip, drop. There were tears falling down, and Qin Mu raised his head while wiping his own eyes to look up. Tears were rolling down the cheeks of the man in the tree. Suddenly, something seemed to squirm in the tree above and slither down while coiling around the trunk like a huge snake. A queer and cryptic voice came out from its mouth. Qin Hanjin, now that you met Qin Fengqing, your wish should be fulfilled, right? Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 312, Saturn Sovereign. Qin Mu's thoughts went into disorder. Qin Hanjin, Qin Fengqing? The family register that he had found in the study room had recorded the people of founding emperor's bloodline, and on the last page of the family register was the sentence, 107th generation, son of Hanjin Fengqing. Qin Fengqing was the son of Qin Hanjin. So what did the words from the weird thing that slithered down from the tree mean? Who was she calling Qin Hanjin? And who was the Qin Fengqing that she mentioned? Qin Mu's body trembled, and his face turned pale, bloodless. He was Qin Fengqing, and the man in the tree was Qin Hanjin. The last person in the family register of founding emperor was none other than him, and the man in the tree was his father. This person who had fused with this ancient tree was his father? Was he the kin that he had been longing for every day? His closest kin. Why had he become like this? Qin Mu repeatedly told himself to stay calm, since old Ma had once told him to never lose his composure no matter what he encountered. He needed to stay level-headed. Even if came face to face with an apocalypse, he could find a way to survive in a sure death situation if only he kept his calm. Cripple had also once told him to always maintain his smile and stay positive. It was not only to numb the enemies but to also keep his own spirits up. Even if a leg was chopped off, he always had to show his most sincere smile. Only then would he have a chance to escape. Granny C had also once said that no matter if his heart was plagued by darkness or a devil, he needed to stay strong. Once he was messed up, everything would be over. However, even if danger was close to Qin Mu, he couldn't compose himself. When his father, his closest kin that he had never met before, had entered such a state, he couldn't do what old Ma, Granny C, and Cripple had told him. Qin Mu tried his best to compose himself and not think about the man in the tree or even care about him. He suppressed the trembling of his body. Suddenly, he felt a slight pain in his palms. He had subconsciously gripped his fists so tight that his nails stabbed into his palms, bringing out blood. Qin Mu raised his head and looked at the mysterious entity that was slithering down. It was half a snake and half a human that had an extremely huge body. Even though the lower half was that of a snake, it had no scales. The upper half of the body was that of a woman. She was very beautiful and alluring, but the voice that came from her mouth belonged to a man. Her body left a trail of the sticky liquid. She looked like the form of Saturn's sovereign that Qin Mu transformed into, but her form was much more primitive. There seemed to be something like 2 flesh membranes growing on the back of her neck, and when she spoke, they would open up like 2 fans stabbing on the sides of her neck, going over her head and trembling continuously to create the sounds. She seemed to not be able to open her mouth to speak. Instead, she relied on the trembling of the flesh membranes to make noise. Because of that, her voice was very weird and cryptic. The flesh membranes had to be her vocal cords, and on their tips were bone spikes that were 2 feet long and looked like javelins. When the membranes opened, 2 pictures of black eyeballs would be revealed, which seemed like 2 strange eyes. According to what Qin Mu knew, there were 2 forms of Saturn's sovereign. The first kind was a simple Saturn sovereign's form that didn't have gate of heaven influence or the scripture in hand. The other kind was Qin Mu's one, which had gate of heaven influence behind him and a scripture in his hand. However, the strange life form in front of him had a form that was even more primitive. It didn't look like she had cultivated this form but was born in it. This was a life form of Yudu that might even be a god. She and the owner of the eyes that were 900 yards apart were 2 different people. You and I made a promise, Qin Hanjin. She slithered to the bottom of the tree and coiled around it. Her alluring face closed in on the face of the man in the tree and rubbed her head against his. The flesh membranes behind her neck trembled and gave off a sound as she laughed. You and I made the pact of Earth Count that as long as you find your son named Qin Fengqing, you will let go of everything and follow me to Yudu, handing over the location of Carefree Village. Now that you have found him, your wish is achieved and it's time to fulfill your promise. The man in the tree didn't move, his gaze still on Qin Mu's body. His corporeal body had already turned into wood, and his eyes could no longer see the person in front of him clearly. Yet tears were still flowing out from them. The strange life form surrounded the body of the ancient tree and left the man alone for a moment. As she slithered around leisurely, her voice floated over erratically. When you barged into Yudu world and broke the ceiling barrier, you were left only with a last breath, so you merged with this divine tree. This was for no other reason than to meet with your son, so you exhausted all you could to preserve your life. I came here and accompanied you. In time, you promised me that as long as you meet your son, you will be able to let go of everything, no matter if it's your life or Carefree Village. You'd be willing to hand over your soul to Earth Count as well as the location of Carefree Village. I agreed to your terms, which was why I didn't take your life. Her face suddenly hung down from the divine tree and landed in front of Qin Mu's face. Her huge body circled around him, and she released a strange laugh. Could you be thinking of going back on your word after seeing your son? Do you want to see your son die in front of you? Such a delicious body, such a young life. He's only 16 years old. Am I right? He must be tender and juicy. Cold sweats broke out on Qin Mu's forehead, and he suddenly executed Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique to operate Saturn Sovereign's Earth Marquee True technique, transforming into the form of Saturn Sovereign. With a hoarse voice, he said, "This senior, you also have a Saturn Sovereign's form?" The strange Yudu life form suddenly stretched her snake body and slithered away from the body of the towering tree, landing back on the ground. Yet her long tail was still coiled around the tree and not completely off. Looking down at this miniature youth in front of her, she let out a playful smile. What a pitiful little thing. How laughable and immature you are to show off this trick in front of me. Don't you know? Saturn Sovereign's form is merely imitating me. I am none other than Saturn Sovereign. She bent her body down to Qin Mu's face, expecting to see fear on the face of this youth. She wanted to see uneasiness and despair after his knowledge has been destroyed. Qin Mu tried his best to stay composed, but she still saw the fear deep in his heart. Saturn Sovereign raised her head in satisfaction and smiled. What an interesting little man, trying his best to be like an adult yet looking so cute from not knowing anything. Didn't you say a Yudu phrase when you boarded the ship? You only know that single Yudu phrase, right? That phrase is gate of heaven influence. Did you really think I would have retreated just because of hearing this phrase and allow you to board the ship? Qin Mu suppressed the trembling of his body. In front of a god like Saturn's sovereign, all his schemes were useless. Like what she had said, he had always tried his best to be like an adult, a person that could shoulder everything. He learned how the people of the village handled things and learned from what they did, yet in nature he was still a big boy. In front of Saturn's sovereign, his hard work, his studies, his maturity all seemed laughable. Looking at how you are trying your best to act like an adult, I won't make things difficult for you. Saturn's sovereign returned to the tree, and her tail coiled around the divine tree like a woman clinging to the man she loved. The flesh membranes behind her head opened up and trembled as she smiled. Qin Hanjin, you should be happy that you, father and son, have reunited. So why am I feeling such sorrow from you? That's right, that's because from today onwards, both of you will be separated forever, one living and one dying. Sure. There's no need for you to be like this. She slithered to the man in the tree and looked up at him while talking leisurely. If you say the location of Carefree Village, all your children and clansmen will be free to go to Yudu to accompany you. Truly interesting. A pitiful human dared to make a deal with a god and thought to have struck a bargain, not knowing that he had lost everything. Meanwhile, the chips I had used for the deal were merely your life. She came to the right side of the man in the tree and couldn't resist smiling. Her expression was filled with happiness, and she whispered beside his ear, I used your life in exchange for the lives of everyone in Carefree Village, as well as the life of your son, and you merely got a chance to meet your son for a moment. What a foolish mortal, even if you mastered the power of gods and devils, you were still affected by your foolish thoughts. Like this, you will never achieve the mental state of gods. And because you are bounded by the pact of Earth Count, you can't go against your oath. The man in the tree regained his composure and opened his mouth. However, since his tongue had already turned into wood, he couldn't make any sound. Saturn's sovereign smiled. What are you trying to say? The man in the tree moved his mouth again, but nothing came out. Saturn's sovereign came closer, wishing to know what he was speaking. She asked curiously, What are you trying to say? The man in the tree still couldn't utter a sound. Qin Mu's mental state suddenly calmed down, and he said, Saturn's sovereign, the hearts of father and son are one. I think I know what he is trying to say. Saturn's sovereign took a look at him. He certainly didn't make any sound, yet you could hear? The life of us father and son are in Saturn's sovereign's hand. With this, is Saturn's sovereign still afraid of us playing any tricks? Qin Mu said. Saturn's sovereign looked at him deeply and chuckled. You guys can't play any tricks. Come over. Let's see what he wants to say. Qin Mu went forward and came to the face of the man in the tree. Tilting his head to listen, he said after a moment. He is saying that his eyes are almost blind so he can't see my face clearly. Therefore this doesn't count as seeing me, which is why the Pact of Earth Count is still not in effect. Saturn's sovereign was astonished and smiled. Interesting, I would have never expected you, father and son, to indeed have interlinked intentions. This is troublesome. The forbidden technique he executed fused him with the divine tree, and it is called Spring Comes Upon a Withered Tree, a forbidden technique that borrows life force from others. However, its drawback is also very strong. Not only are the lives interconnected, the same happens even to the corporeal bodies. When your father fought with those gods, he exhausted them to death, but he also exhausted himself to death. Thus he had no choice but to extend his life with a forbidden technique. Now, only his face is yet to completely turn into wood, so reversing this process is very difficult, but not for me. After all, I'm from Yudu and control life. The flesh membranes behind Saturn's sovereign's head opened up and revealed the pictures of the eyes. Two beams shot out from them and hit the body of the man in the tree. Gradually, the wood on the surface started to shed off, and the vein lines on the skin of his neck no longer looked like grains of a tree. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 313, Father and Son. The beams that shot out from the eye pictures on the flesh membranes behind Saturn's sovereign's head suppressed the lignification of the man in the tree. Once the wooden nature in the body was suppressed, the eyes would be able to see. The face of the man in the tree broke free from the tree bit by bit, and the wooden nature of his tongue also gradually faded. Swoosh! The picture of the eyes on the flesh membrane behind Saturn Sovereign's brain closed, and she said, "Qin Hanjin, you should be able to see your son now, right?" She was very careful and knew that the man in the tree was extremely powerful. He was no inferior to her at his peak, so she didn't completely undo the forbidden technique on his body. She only allowed his eyes to be able to clearly see what's in front of them. The man in the tree shut his eyes closed and opened his mouth. However, there were still no sounds. Qin Mu tilted his ears to listen and nodded repeatedly. After a moment, he said, "What he meant is that Saturn Sovereign had guessed something wrong." Saturn Sovereign tilted her head and sneered, "What did I guess wrong?" The man in the tree opened his eyes. They still couldn't see anything, and the skin on his face was rapidly lignifying. However, the roots of the divine tree were trembling. Qin Mu's expression regained its composure. "What Saturn Sovereign guessed wrongly is that he didn't want to see me and fulfill the pact of Earth Count. For it to happen, he's willing to never see me. His aim was just to have Saturn Sovereign help him suppress part of the wooden nature so he could regain a portion of his mobility." Saturn Sovereign sneered, and the flesh membranes behind her head trembled. "Is this what Qin Hanjin wants to say, or what you want to say? Boy Feng Qing, are you too conceited and overestimate your own abilities? So what if Qin Hanjin regains a fraction of his movement? His divine sword has already broke, and when relying on just a small body part, he is absolutely not my opponent." Qin Mu shook his head and said, "This is what I want to say, but also what he wants to say. Even gods and devils can't control everything. There will always be some life forms which are unwilling to accept their fate and try to jump out. He isn't totally unable to fight back. Because I've brought him his sword." Behind Qin Mu's back, snow-bright sword light rushed into the sky. Carefree Sword had shattered the wooden sword sheath, and a huge wooden hand grew out from the divine tree. Sword light instantly filled the entire hall, and everywhere in front of Qin Mu's eyes became snow-white. He couldn't see anything at all. This was a sword skill that was close to the path. It surpassed his understanding and was beyond his scope. The sword exploded with world-shaking power and rays. The broad and powerful divine lights shone as sword lights and mercury flooded the ground. They then flooded the sky, and in an instant, what Qin Mu saw was no longer the sword. Instead, he saw the sorrows, joys, partings, and reunions of a person, their lifetime pursuits and the will with no regrets. The sword and path had fused into one. Village Chief's sword picture, Dao Sex Dao sword. All these legendary sword skills lost their color in front of this. Within the sword light, Saturn Sovereign's cry of astonishment rang out, and Qin Mu could feel the overflowing divine power. Intense heat waves came sweeping over, followed by boundless pressure as if he was being crushed by the vast and incomparably thick land. He saw a huge orange-yellow star that possessed vast and mighty power, looking like it was going to crush everything in sight. Saturn Sovereign stood in front of that huge star, overflowing with imposing might. Qin Mu's eyes began to burn then, and he immediately shut them closed. He felt the overflowing divine power weaken rapidly as Saturn Sovereign quickly went away. After that, there was the sound of the door slamming. "Qin Hanjin, Qin Fengqing, I'll definitely come back to find you, father and son." The weird voice of Saturn Sovereign echoed from farther and farther away. With a loud bang, the treasured ship swayed violently. Saturn Sovereign had to have escaped. Zhnng. There was a humming sound, and Qin Mu secretly opened his eyes. The sword lights that had filled the space just then had vanished, and Carefree Sword was stabbed right in front of him with the hilt of the sword still vibrating. Below the sword was a pool of god blood which was giving off multicolored divine lights that were very astonishing. Qin Mu turned around and saw the face of the man in the tree. The lignification gradually faded away, but he still kept his eyes shut tight. He wasn't willing to open them. If he did that, the Pact of Earth Count would be activated. Earth Count would then take his soul, and Carefree Village would be revealed. His kin would all die because of it. Qin Mu stared blankly. Could he never open his eyes to see him? Am I called Qin Fengqing? Qin Mu asked in a low voice while looking at the man in the tree. Village chief gave me a name of Mu. Qin Mu, the cowherd boy with the surname Qin. He leaned against the tree and said in a low voice, "From that moment onwards, I've always been called Qin Mu. Only now did I learn that my parents had already given a name to me. Fengqing is a little unfamiliar. Are you my father?" The man still kept his eyes shut, but a branch grew out from the tree. A tender leaf took form on it and gently stroked Qin Mu's head. He leaned against the tree in silence as hundreds of emotions burst forth in his heart. No one had ever touched him like this before. Apothecary wouldn't, as he didn't like kids. When he was concocting his medicine, he would either grab the young Qin Mu to put him in the medicinal cauldron by a hand or a leg. Blind wouldn't as well. Even if Qin Mu executed the best staff skill, Blind would only nod and give a look of praise, but he would never spoil him. Granny C had never brought up a child before, being forced to wash and change his diapers every day. Only when Qin Mu had grown up a bit and helped her do the chores and tailoring that she sometimes praised him. Old Ma, who was the strictest, never praised anyone. When he saw Qin Mu, he was always reminded of his dead children, so his face was always very grim. Thus he never even smiled. Deaf, on the other hand, would always find him annoying, in all shapes and forms. When he was painting, he would always chase Qin Mu out. Even when he was teaching Qin Mu how to read, write, and paint, he would mostly smack his hands and seldom praise him. Mute was always naughty and found all kinds of methods to play tricks on him, entertaining himself with this. Cripple would usually bring him along to steal stuff or just steal from him. He had a childish heart and treated Qin Mu as a partner. As for Village Chief, he had no arms or legs, and he was also a gloomy fellow. Even though he smiled frequently, he was plagued with lots of matters of the heart. No one had ever touched Qin Mu's head like this, not even a cold and dead branch. This was a feeling he had never felt before. Qin Mu tilted his head up to look at the sky at an angle, trying to not let his tears cover his vision. In the past, he always wanted to be like an adult, as the adults in the village were his role models. He learned from their characters and followed them in how they handled affairs. However, at this moment, he felt like he was a little child that should have been used to being by his parents. The divine tree he was leaning against was very durable, and although its bark was slightly painful to press on, his heart was at peace, as tranquil as it had ever been. It was as if he had returned to the safe bay called home. The old man from the painting came out from nowhere and looked around before sneaking into the tree. Raising his head to look, he didn't know why was this place so quiet. "You are very good." A hoarse voice came from the divine tree, as if the wooden man had opened his mouth to speak. Each word was said with difficulty and no emotions could be heard from them. Yet Qin Mu's body shuddered. "You are very good." This was the voice of the man in the tree, and he seemed like he only knew this phrase. He seemed like he hadn't praised a child before and couldn't think of anything else to say. The reason he said that was because Qin Mu had understood his intentions. The father and son were interlinked, and Qin Mu could understand what he was saying. However, at that point in time he couldn't even make a sound, so how could he have said anything? Yet Qin Mu had guessed his intentions and lured Saturn's sovereign into making a move, suppressing part of his wooden nature and allowing him to execute his magic power. Qin Mu had then leaned over to give him a chance to grab the sword, using words at the same time to mess up the mental state of Saturn's sovereign. This created another chance, and this one was to strike. Qin Mu revealed a smile and said in a low voice, "We are father and son, and even though we have never met before, I feel like there are ways in which we are similar. I have made the pact of Earth count with others before and know the shenanigans of it." The man in the tree gave a sound of acknowledgement. Qin Mu lay there and enjoyed the rare tranquility. After a long time, a flower bloomed on the tree and a fruit was born. It dropped off the tree and landed in his hand, its fragrance assaulting his nostrils. Parents were all like this, always worrying that their children wouldn't have enough to eat or would not be warm. Qin Mu was stunned. Granny C had found him at the side of surging river outside disabled elderly village that was in great ruins. She didn't find him in Yudu, So how did he get to Great Ruins? What had happened back then? How do I go back to Carefree Village? Qin Mu then asked. The man in the tree continued to keep his eyes shut while replying in a cryptic voice. Elder Painting will bring you to the study room. There's something inside that I've left for you. Go, we shall never meet again. Every word he said was uttered with difficulty, and each one was like a stab to the throat. Qin Mu's heart tightened and crumbled. Father and son will never meet again? The old man from the painting waved at him and signaled for him to pull out Carefree Sword. Qin Mu composed himself and went forward to pull out Carefree Sword, which was stuck in the ground. The old man in the painting then waved at him again and motioned for him to follow him. Qin Mu turned his head back, but the eyes of the man in the tree were still shut. He didn't open his eyes. Elder Painting had to have some sort of connection with the man in the tree. As for what kind of connection it was, Qin Mu had no idea. Maybe it was the man in the tree that had bestowed life to him. Can't father and son meet again? Qin Mu asked loudly. The man in the tree still had his eyes tightly shut, and his voice sounded a bit heartless when he said, "No, I will save you." Qin Mu turned around and went after the old man from the painting while shouting in a loud voice, "Isn't it just Earth Count? I'll get rid of him. So wait for me." The divine tree remained motionless, but after a while, the man in the tree slowly opened his eyes and tears rolled down from them. He heard Qin Mu's footsteps outside the room. This youth was saying to the old man from the painting in a low voice, "Elder Painting, after I leave, help me take care of him." In the study room of the treasured ship, Elder Painting moved and came to the front of the bookshelf. The books there had all been taken by someone, leaving only a clean bookshelf. Pan Gong Tso, this scoundrel, coming to rob my house? Qin Mu was furious. Suddenly, Elder Painting tunneled into a painting and waved toward him from inside. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment before walking over. What followed was something marvelous. He discovered that he actually walked into the painting and became a man in the painting. There, a man in white stood as if waiting for him to arrive. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 314, Techniques Handed Down in the Family. It was Qin Mu's first time encountering such a strange incident as walking into the world inside a painting. This path of painting was different from Def's path of painting. Def's paintings transformed his paintings into reality. For example, if he painted a storm and shook the painting, a storm would erupt in reality. Once, he painted the 18 levels of hell, and the entire heavenly painting Imperial City suddenly crumbled, transforming into the 18 levels of hell. This was how his paintings affected reality. The painting in which Qin Mu had walked into was a complete opposite. It allowed him to enter the painting, and when he did so, he became part of the painting. However, when he went inside, he discovered that it wasn't a two-dimensional world. It was three-dimensional, and there was a very vast space around. This is another kind of painting path, Qin Mu thought to himself after examining his surroundings. If Def's painting allowed his brush strokes to invade reality, then this painting path developed a world internally. If these two paths were to ever complement each other and fuse, the height of the painting path could be brought to an unimaginable elevation. Qin Mu pondered. If one achieved this step with the rays of a brush, storms would sweep through a battlefield and bombard countless enemy troops. That storm could then sweep the enemy troops into the painting before raising the brush to erase that painting. This could be the so-called use of one stroke to sweep away a 10,000-men army. Scholar full of pep, full of vim, nothing more than this. Qin Mu pushed away his wandering thoughts. The attainments he had in the path of painting were far inferior to those of Def. This grandpa of his was like an insurmountable mountain which he could only look up to. He felt he should tell this idea to Def and let this existence at the peak of the painting path research these two kinds of painting paths, fusing the two of them into one. He should then learn from Def again, and it would make him succeeded in cultivating these two painting paths quicker. Def was more proficient, so if he was to let him research before learning from him, he could save a lot of time to do other stuff in the meantime. Furthermore, Def's painting path would be able to reach an even higher realm. He looked towards the man in white who had to be the painting of his father, Qin Hanjin. He was once again alive in this world. When he had become the man in the tree, His graceful bearing and demeanor couldn't be seen. Whereas in the painting, Qin Mu could see the elegant manner of his father. The only pity was that this wasn't the real Qin Hanjin. It was just a man in the painting. There was no sound in this world. So the Qin Hanjin there couldn't open his mouth to speak either. He could only do some simple actions like writing and painting. He wasn't the real Qin Hanjin and was only drawn by him. It was drawing bestowed life just like elder painting. Qin Mu came to his side and saw that he was currently painting the diagrams of Daoyin technique. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. Overlord Body 3 Elixir Technique. The man painting was already a strange thing, yet what he was painting was the Overlord Body 3 Elixir Technique that Qin Mu was cultivating. In regards to it, Qin Mu naturally had an extreme appreciation. He had relied on the Daoyin technique as enlightenment to awaken his spirit embryo, which in time resulted in his achievements. The Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique that he had seen before was somewhat different from the Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique he cultivated. He started painting from the first realm of the Daoyin technique, but it was different from what Qin Mu had cultivated. It was much simpler and cleaner. The Daoyin technique of Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique that village chief had taught Qin Mu was considered the most simple and fundamental technique in the world. It was the technique that was the most suitable for ordinary people to cultivate. Yet the Daoyin technique drawn by the man in the painting was even simpler, but it wasn't crude. Qin Mu's current scope was far different from when he was young. He understood the logic that the simpler the fundamentals were, the higher the achievements would be. This was like painting on a white paper. The less thing there was in the foundation, the cleaner the end result would be. The things painted on white could be more exquisite and fine. If one was to draw on a paper on which somebody had already scribbled, it would be difficult to write a fine work or paint a magnificent painting on top of such a foundation, no matter what divine brush was used. The Daoyin technique of the man in the painting was simple to an unimaginable extent. Qin Mu tried to execute his vital qi according to what he saw, and at first, it was slightly sluggish, but with the circulation, it soon became more lively and boundless, reaching his limbs and bones, giving him a feeling of seizing the creation of heaven and earth. If I had had such a Daoyin technique, I'm afraid it would have been even harder to break through the spirit embryo wall. Qin Mu sighed ruefully. When village chief had imparted Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique to him, he had to have done some minor adjustments to make it simpler for it to break through the spirit embryo wall. If it was for the better or worse, it couldn't be said. After changing the technique, the spirit embryo wall was much easier to break. But the foundation wasn't as dense as it would have been with the Daoyin technique the man in the painting had drawn. And at that time, the most crucial thing for Qin Mu had been to break through the spirit embryo wall. The man in the painting painted the second diagram, and the second Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique was what Qin Mu had seen in the Valley of Doom Suppression Palace. There was little difference between the two diagrams, only minute changes in some places. Qin Mu tried to execute the diagram and instantly felt like his spirit embryo bore the heaven and earth. This stirred heart stirred uncontrollably. The Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique that he had learned from Doom Suppression Palace didn't have this feeling. Spirit embryo was the realm of martial arts practitioners. Only by reaching this step could one be considered to have stepped through the door of cultivation. The foundation was extremely important, but passing through the door was extremely important as well. According to Qin Mu's current understanding, spirit embryo divine treasure opened the heaven and earth in his body. As he cultivated and his cultivation became more and more profound, the heaven and earth became more distinguished. The top was heaven and the bottom was earth. The spirit embryo was located in the middle, and below its feet was the spirit platform, breathing in and out the 5 qi, which was gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. The legs of the spirit embryo stepped on the land, and the body unified the 6 directions, which were heaven, earth, north, south, east, and west. Qin Mu had cultivated to 6 directions realm, and his understanding of these divine treasures was this. As for 7 stars, celestial being, life and death, and divine bridge, his understandings wasn't deep regarding them, but he still had thoughts on them. 6 directions realm could cultivate the primordial spirit, and it grew as the spirit embryo absorbed the soul and vital qi during cultivation, becoming the primordial spirit upon reaching Six Directions realm. When the primordial spirit could leave the body, one would basically be at celestial being realm. Qin Mu had never felt anything wrong with his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique ever since he started cultivating it. Only when he followed the diagrams of the man in the painting did he realize that something was missing. Spirit embryo needed to grow into primordial spirit. If it couldn't bear the heaven and earth in his spirit embryo divine treasure, it meant that his cultivation wasn't there yet. What he was lacking previously might have been this. He then looked at the third diagram. It was for 5 elements realm. The circulation diagram Qin Mu had received back then wasn't complete. He had relied on the wisdom of Patriarch and himself to patch the circulation path. However, a flaw was left behind on his left shoulder. Even though Qin Mu had relied on great educational heavenly devil scriptures to patch it up, there was still some hinders when he executed his technique. It was just that the influence wasn't too big and Qin Mu was too outstanding. He was able to sweep through all the martial arts practitioners of 5 elements realm and even some of the weaker 6 directions realm's divine arts practitioners, so he had never delved into this problem. The circulation diagram of 5 elements realm that the man in the painting drew was a complete one. Qin Mu studied it in detail and let out a sigh of relief. This circulation diagram could finally patch the part that was missing in his technique so no more flaws would remain. The fourth diagram was different from what he was cultivating now. It was more complicated. Qin Mu stared at it blankly. From the first Daoyin diagram, he had noticed something interesting. Comparing the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that the man in the painting drew and his own Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, the techniques of the formed had a tendency to become more and more complicated. It was like drawing a sapling that had broken out of the soul and only had 2 budding leaves, then slowly showing him grow luxuriant branches and leaves. The Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that he had pieced together was lacking in comparison. It was like a small tree whose one branch grew to the east while the other pointed to the west. Even though it could also become a huge tree, it was quite crooked. Furthermore, the techniques drawn by the man in the painting had no divine arts. Although only the circulation diagrams had been drawn, when Qin Mu executed any divine arts, he had a feeling of being able to use it casually. Suddenly, his heart trembled, and the sound of woodcutter imparting his scriptures on the rock rang out in his brain. The reciting and the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique drawn by the man in the painting combined, and Qin Mu opened his mouth in astonishment. Unity technique had actually overlapped with the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that the man in the painting had drawn. It was fusion, and overlapping. Unity technique contained the general principles of great educational heavenly devil scriptures. It was like the sacred tree that Woodcutter had imparted to heavenly devil cult founder. Unity technique was the body of an ancient tree while great educational heavenly devil scriptures were its thousands of branches and roots. The previous heavenly devil cult masters had all needed to comprehend their own unity technique. Only then could they unify great educational heavenly devil scriptures. Everyone's comprehension of unity technique was different, not one them being the same. At this moment, Qin Mu combined the scriptures imparted by Woodcutter on the rock and discovered to his astonishment that unity technique of heavenly devil cult was actually the same as Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. He had a feeling that space and time were in disorder. Unity technique of great educational heavenly devil scriptures was actually the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that he had cultivated. Could Heavenly Saint Cult be from Carefree Village? In that case, the woodcutter that had imparted his techniques. He had a weird expression. Was his surname Qin as well? He didn't think much about it and continued to look at the paintings in an entranced state. He subconsciously followed the circulation diagram, and there was absolutely no hindrance with his vital qi circulation. It became livelier and smoother with each pass. When the man in the painting drew the 8th diagram, he finished the foundation to Divine Bridge Realm. Qin Mu concentrated on memorizing it, not expecting the man in the painting to not stop. Instead, he continued to draw the 9th diagram. There's still a realm above Divine Bridge Realm? Qin Mu was astonished. Wasn't Divine Bridge Realm the last realm? In that case, what was the realm the 9th circulation diagram was meant for? The ninth diagram was extremely complicated and linked the first 7 great divine treasures. When the vital qi circulated, all 7 great divine treasures had to be mobilized. It could be said to be so complicated that one wrong step could cause qi deviation. Qin Mu concentrated on memorizing it, not daring to be sloppy. Yet there was too much information contained in this 9th diagram. It made him dizzy, and his eyes dimmed. Once the man in the painting finished drawing the 9th diagram, he stopped. After a moment, when Qin Mu had completely memorized all the 9 diagrams, he moved and attacked. Qin Mu immediately defended, and within a few moves he was dropped to the ground. Once the man in the painting dropped him, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he waited for Qin Mu to recover before starting over. "He's feeding me moves." Qin Mu's eyes lit up. On the deck of the treasured ship, numerous great shamans, shaman kings, and soldiers of barbarian D Empire were attacking the bridge while 2 white bats and a dragon Qilin were guarding the door, not letting them in. Pangong Tsowad checking the books and treasures he had ransacked so far. "These books all have seals, and it'll be slightly troublesome to break them open. I'll have to mobilize the corporeal bodies of my previous lifetimes." Pangong Tso looked at book after book and was somewhat disappointed when he couldn't open even a single one. Looking back at the building on the ship, he thought to himself, "It's been 2 months already, and that brat still hasn't come out." Suddenly, a door opened, and Qin Mu popped his bruised head out. When he saw him, he waved, and Pangong Tso rushed after him in a hurry, elated. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 315. This is bad. This brat got beaten so miserably. Could he have met the terrifying entity hidden on this ship? Pangong Tso gave chase with a slight suspicion in his heart. But didn't that terrifying entity already run away? When Saturn Sovereign had escaped from the treasured ship, a lot of activity was happening throughout the ship. Pangong Tso was searching through the rooms for his followers that were still scattered. Some of them were still waiting on the deck, but when he came there, the people on the deck had disappeared. They had to have been swept off into Yudu world by the gale which was raised by Saturn Sovereign's escape. This had happened 2 months ago. During this period of time, Pangong Tso had brought everyone to search through all the rooms and collected all the treasures that could be moved. Only when he wanted to ransack the bridge did he meet with a hindrance, the Dragon Qilin and the White Bat brothers. They blocked off the way, making it impossible to enter the room. There was only one door into the bridge, and Pangong Tso would have had to go through it if they wanted to enter the room. However, the 2 white bats and the Dragon Qilin were not weak. Once they decided to guard the door, even the Shaman King of Life and Death Realm couldn't break through. Due to that, in the last few days, Pangong Tso had them attacked continuously so they wouldn't be able to get any rest. The moment Pangong Tso barged into a room, he immediately executed 10,000 Locusts banner, and numerous locusts started to circle around his body, protecting him. At this moment, the sound of a door closing came from behind him. Qin Mu had stayed next to the door and had just closed it. Pangong Tso rushed forward a dozen steps before turning back with a smile. "Cult Master Qin, why have you lured me here?" The bruises on Qin Mu's face were obvious traces of being thrashed, and his voice was full of resentment. "I had suffered numerous beatings over the past 2 months, and my confidence is severely crippled. Old brother, you should also know, if a person fails too many times without succeeding once, their hearts will become twisted and they will become perverted." Pangong Tso was astonished. What kind of person could actually beat Cult Master Qin into such a state? This is starting to interest me. Other than me, who else in this world can actually defeat Cult Master Qin repeatedly and make him feel such a strong sense of defeat? Could that person be a divine arts practitioners of 7 Stars realm? Qin Mu touched the injuries on his face. What he used was his cultivation of 6 directions realm. Pangong Tso was even more astonished and let out a shaky breath as he praised, "This person truly has great abilities." Qin Mu said very sincerely, "Therefore, old brother, I can only take the chance to find you during a break. To prevent my spirit from becoming twisted and my mind from becoming perverted, won't you let me give you a beating?" Pangong Tso's eyebrows drooped, and his gaze fell on the 10,000 Locusts banner he was holding. With a low laugh, he said, Cult Master Qin. I usually don't fight battles that I know I can't win, so I usually use dirty tricks in such situations. However, when I saw you waving at me sneakily, I ran over immediately. Do you know why? He raised his head. I have cultivated diligently for the past 2 months and have improved extremely compared to 2 months ago. You also know I'm the Grandmaster of Roland's Golden Palace and have already reincarnated 18 times. 2 months of my cultivation is equivalent to 2 years of your cultivation. I've chased after you not to listen to your rubbish and not to get beaten by you as well. I'm here to kill you. He erupted in fury, and his black hair rushed upwards. Swinging his 10,000 locusts banner, he attacked Qin Mu while shouting sternly, "I'll beat you to death. Hand over that silver helmet and I'll let you die peacefully." Ding, 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 ding. The flying locusts and the sword rain collided. The thin wings of the golden-colored locusts were like knives while Qin Mu's flying swords were incomparably heavy. In that instant, the collisions filled the entire room with sparks shooting off in all directions. Among the sword lights and flying locusts, Pan Gongtso stabbed the 10,000 locusts banner onto the ground, and his feet flashed as he moved left and right among the sword rain and flying locusts to close in on his target. Qin Mu's footwork was also changing unpredictably while he closed in on Pan Gongtso as well. The room they were in wasn't very large, so with all the places having flying swords and flying locusts clashing with each other, any carelessness would lead to being stabbed or even losing one's life. Qin Mu and Pan Gongtso had been researching on how to transform their divine arts to become fine, so due to the room's size, their flying locusts and flying swords were all shrunk to the smallest possible size. The flying swords were no more than 3 inches long, while the flying locusts were no more than 5 fingernails long. The smaller they got, the more dangerous it would become to move through the room. The action would require extremely great eyesight and judgment to avoid the sword rain and the flying locusts. The next moment, the two people exchanged palms and fists, bursting forth with force. A crisp cry of thunder instantly sounded in the room. Pan Gongtso revealed a smile. With my current cultivation, he gave a grunt when he felt the opponent's terrifying strength. Astonished. He had cultivated diligently these days, and his cultivation had increased tremendously. Thus, it should have had an overwhelming advantage. Instead, when he exerted his full strength, Qin Mu still had a slight upper hand. How was this possible? Was this brat also someone who had reincarnated? However, he noticed that something wasn't right. Qin Mu hadn't surpassed him in the cultivation of magic power. Instead, his vital qi had become even purer, and the way he used his moves and divine arts had improved by a level. Even his corporeal body had become stronger. This meant that Qin Mu could use less vital qi to have his divine arts burst forth with a greater power. He had gone ahead in terms of finesse in his divine arts. When his attacks didn't hit, the power would rarely leak out, while when they did hit, the force of the explosion would be even stronger. Pan Gongtso and Qin Mu had gone into that mysterious corridor together, and both of them had seen the markings of the divine arts and divine weapons on the wall. However, both of them had only gained a superficial understanding from the cursory observation and hadn't researched it deeper. Yet Qin Mu had surpassed Pan Gongtso in the attainments of this path. This is bad. Pan Gongtso was stupefied. He had a bad feeling about this. Now that Qin Mu's cultivation had increased and his vital qi had become purer, he would exhaust a lot less magic power. With his corporeal body improving as well, it was obvious that Qin Mu's battle prowess and endurance would both surpass him. Even though it wasn't much, it would be enough for him to achieve victory as long as he was an inch superior. The battle was fine for the moment, but once it dragged out, Pan Gongtso was going to be in deep shit. When their big moves clashed, the 8,000 swords and 10,000 locust banner both exhausted a great amount of magic power. This made their vital qi deplete at a rapid pace, and so the numbers of flying swords and flying locusts they could control declined. Yet Qin Mu's corporeal body was still going strong as he unleashed his moves unhindered. He split mountains and rocks with his punches and kicks that contained astonishing power, forcing Pan Gongtso to fall back continuously. Suddenly, Pan Gongtso crashed backward and threw open a door on his way there. He took this chance to close the door. Before it could happen, A huge force came bombarding over, blowing him away and smacking him into the wall on the opposite side. I just need to hold on until my subordinates find me. As long as they come, this brat will surely die. Pan Gong Tso remained calm. In the past 2 months, he had taught some shaman kings how to calculate the spell of space integration to find the treasures on the ship and that mysterious corridor. Those shaman kings would definitely find their way over. However, the wisdom and algebra of those shaman kings were inferior to his own, so they would definitely take some time to find their way over to him. Thus, he needed to hold on until they did. Qin Mu came whooshing over and attacked him from a distance, engaging in hand-to-hand combat once he was close. The number of flying swords and flying locusts they used in this clash was even lower. Qin Mu controlled 9 swords, each of which was extremely fine as it swam to and fro around his body. Those swords were like flying fish that were the length of a finger. Pan Gong Tso's 9 flying locusts were also extremely fine, and they looked like real golden locusts. Even though the 2 fighters' vital chi was severely depleted, their attacks were still extremely fierce. When they were attacking from a distance yet close to each other, any carelessness would result in that person dying. Pan Gong Tso dealt with the attacks carefully, but his cultivation was still depleting too rapidly until it was finally exhausted. Qin Mu's cultivation was also exhausted, but his corporeal body was still as strong as a bull. Pan Gong Tso could only block over a dozen attacks before his defense was broken. In an instant, his entire face was bruised. Qin Mu pressed him against the floor and beat him until his eyes could no longer open. Pan Gong Tso shouted out, "Well done! Come and beat me some more if you have the guts." Qin Mu gave 2 more punches before he heard a door opening. His heart wavered, and he immediately stopped. Pan Gong Tso shouted, "Come and beat me some more." Qin Mu put away his flying swords and turned around with a laugh. "Older brother, I'm satisfied. I'll find you another day. That's right, the Tao Tai sack that's on your waist, I'm taking it." Astonished, Pan Gong Tso grabbed towards his waist, his heart turning cold. However, the Tao Tai sack on his waist had already vanished without a trace. He actually didn't realize when Qin Mu had undone it. "My craft is still slightly inferior to that of Grandpa Cripple. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know if I had taken off his pants." Qin Mu tossed the Tao Tai sack up before catching it again and sighed to himself about how Cripple's craft was too excellent. "Kill him!" Pan Gong Tso's voice sounded out as some shaman kings finally came into the room. Qin Mu revealed a smile and turned around to close a nearby door behind himself. On his way out, he collected the flying swords that were scattered on the ground and placed them back into his Tao Tai sack. He also picked up the 10,000 Locusts banner. Opening the Tao Tai sack of Pan Gong Tso, he looked inside and frowned slightly. The books in the study room weren't there, just all the other treasures from the ship. An incense burner, tea set, candlesticks. Pan Gong Tso didn't seem to have carried the books with him. What exactly is recorded in those books from the bookshelves? Techniques of gods? Or is it something else? Qin Mu hung the 2 Tao Tai sacks around his waist and returned to the study room while thinking, "When I beat him up the next time, I should ask where he hid the books." Pan Gong Tso struggled to walk out of the building and come onto the deck. When he saw the gazes of the shaman kings, he knew what they were thinking of him. Once they saw him beaten up to such a state by Qin Mu, their respect for him started to fade. Pan Gong Tso said indifferently, "Cult Master Qin isn't in a good condition as well. He was severely injured by me. I know his name and surname, so when my cultivation recovers, I shall cast a spell to take his life." When his cultivation recovered, he immediately cast his spell. Yet something weird happened. Even though he knew Qin Mu's name and surname, he couldn't find him. It was as if he had vanished from this world. Pan Gong Tso cast his spell again, but his shaman spell still couldn't find Qin Mu. Impossible, he's clearly on the ship, yet the shaman spell can't find him. Could he be hiding in some secret space which blocks off my spell? Qin Mu returned to the painting, and the man there continued to feed him moves. Even though Qin Mu was still defeated time and time again, he was starting to last longer and longer. Time went without anyone's notice, until one day, the treasured ship trembled. Even though Qin Mu was in the world in the painting, he could still feel those tremors. The old man revealed a worried expression and called him over. Qin Mu quickly followed him out and onto the deck. A distance away from the treasured ship, countless Yudu life forms were flooding over. The tremor came from the treasured ship, increasing its speed to escape them. The old man from the painting stood on the door and waved at Qin Mu. Qin Mu was stunned. Were they going to part just like this? Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 316. O Soul, Come Back. The treasured ship left the Yudu life forms in the dust, its speed becoming faster and faster. This was something that had never happened before. On the deck, Pan Gongtso and the rest grabbed onto the guardrails in a hurry so that they wouldn't fly off. Could it be that Qin Mu, that brat, used the silver helmet to drive the ship? Pan Gongtso looked around for him, Qin Mu, and to his surprise saw him holding onto the guardrails as well. He wasn't wearing the silver helmet, so it was obvious that the person controlling the ship wasn't him. Pan Gongtso was slightly stunned. If it wasn't Qin Mu driving the ship, then who was the one doing it? Could there be another terrifying entity hidden on the ship? Or was the ship possessed? Ever since they had come to this strange ship, weird things had been happening one after another, and until they had yet to explore the whole ship. Thinking back on it, it sure was terrifying to meet such strange incidents time and again. The treasured ship was speeding through Yudu world, which was a piece of darkness with no heaven or earth. As they sailed through this endless dark, it was truly frightening. They sailed like this for some time, until the sound of collision rang out and everyone on the ship was almost thrown off. Some of the soldiers and great shamans didn't have a stable footing or grip, so they went overboard. Just as they landed in the darkness outside the ship, their flesh suddenly melted away, and they turned into piles of bones that clattered down. "There's land below!" someone cried out in astonishment. Qin Mu looked down and saw that the treasured ship had collided with the peak of a mountain, creating a huge hole in it. It was this collision that had swung the soldiers and great shamans out. The mountain peak was soon left behind as the passengers watched the land below. What was weird about it was that the land wasn't connected, but seemed to consist of islands floating in the darkness. Boom! Once two huge pieces of land collided, the situation became intense. The tectonic plates were pushing against each other, and instantly, several thousand volcanoes erupted at the same time. Lava spewed into the sky with black smoke, reaching from 900 to 1,000 yards, creating a magnificent sight. Countless bolts of lightning flashed in the thick clouds as they ripped through the sky. The lava that had cooled in the sky came raining down as a terrifying rain of rocks. It had astonishing power, as the rocks came crashing down like meteors with long fiery trails. The earth trembled and the mountains swayed. With the rain of lava, rocks, and acid, it seemed like the apocalypse had come. As the treasured ship sailed through the heavy rain, everyone on the ship burst forth with vital chi to prop up shields to block the weird rain and not get smashed to death. Suddenly, there was a clanking sound, and the lava rain changed into diamonds. Diamonds the size of a fist came raining down from the sky. They were created by lightning strikes and scattered all throughout the ship. The treasured ship tilted to one side, so all the lava rocks and diamonds were swept off, then went around a huge volcano and sailed into the distance. On the volcano, lava was flowing like flame dragons from the mouth of the volcano to the bottom. Qin Mu hurriedly took a look and was shocked. In that earthquaking and mountain-shaking destruction, there were actually millions of people walking up the mountain. With lowered heads, they walked silently through all the destruction, acting like zombies. Every step they took seemed extremely difficult, but they still continued to walk forward as if there was a fatal force of attraction in front of them. At the mouth of the volcano, there were already quite a number of people who had reached it, jumping in without any feeling. They were then drowned by the lava rushing into the sky. Besides this huge volcano, there were thousands of others on this piece of land, which also numbered in thousands. Exactly how many people were walking with difficulty through this apocalypse and throwing themselves into the volcanoes was probably uncountable. They aren't people, they are souls. Qin Mu's heart trembled violently. He could see that these were damned souls, and they had no corporeal body. Furthermore, they were not all human souls. Some of them belonged to strange beasts, demons, dragons, phoenixes, and even heavenly devils. The treasured ship passed by volcanoes after volcanoes with countless of souls walking among them. As the volcanoes erupted, flaming red lava rushed into the sky, accompanied by deafening rumbles. With a pale face, Pangong Tso muttered in a trembling voice, "Yellow Springs, Yellow Springs." Qin Mu stared blankly, not knowing what this fellow was talking about. What Yellow Springs? They are going down the Yellow Springs. Pangong Tso suddenly roared with all his strength. This is the world after we die. We are on the horns of Earth Count. Qin Mu shuddered when he finally understood Pangong Tso's words. Their ship was currently sailing between the horns of Earth Count. These lands weren't lands, but sections of Earth Count's horns. The meaning behind Earth Count's 9 packs came from the 9 bends. They meant that the 2 horns of Earth Count had 9 bends, like a flowing river. Because of that, the 2 horns of Earth Count were also sometimes called 9 Bends Yellow Springs, which likened them to 2 trails of yellow springs. Qin Mu couldn't help feeling his scalp crawl. It did indeed look like this place was called the Yellow Springs. Because of the volcanoes erupting continuously, the lava spread across the sky and lighted the land. Looking from afar, it probably seemed like a yellow or red river. However, weren't these 2 horns a little too huge? Was this even still a god? Hee. Pangong Tso seemed to have suffered a severe setback once and was now a little crazed. He muttered, "This was the truth I had once seen. I can't die. I definitely can't die. Whoever that likes to die can die. I must definitely live on." The treasured ship finally sailed through the lands and left. Qin Mu turned back to take a look and could finally saw the full appearance of the 2 horns. Lava spewed out from the lands and connected all of them together. The lands on top were the sky of the lands below. With such connection, the countless pieces formed 9 bends, which looked like 9 Bends Yellow Springs from afar. Countless souls were guided in from God knows how many worlds into these lands, to jump into the Yellow Springs. And yet they were only the horns of the incomparably humongous Earth Count. Looking down, Qin Mu didn't know how long the 2 horns were. They were hidden deep in the darkness, their end unable to be seen. Under the 2 horns had to be Earth Count's head. Legend said that he had a tiger's head while his horns were those of a bull. Qin Mu, however, could see the head at all. He shrunk back and made a decision deep in his heart. The Pact of Earth Count could never be signed carelessly. If he did so and it took effect, he would probably never be able to make a comeback. He was sad, though. His father had signed the Pact of Earth Count. Once it was signed, it would be difficult to make it void. The treasured ship sailed faster and faster, coming to the sky above another piece of land. This was a crumbling world shrouded in darkness. Paper boats with dead souls floated over from the black. Many of them sailed past the treasured ship and floated towards the land of the 9 packs. The clothes of the souls were all tattered, and they all belonged to Heavenly Devil Horde, the Heavenly Devil race. However, none of them were the fiendish ones Qin Mu had seen in Great Ruins. Instead, they were all old, sick, and weak. Countless paper boats floated past, which made it obvious that an extremely large number of people from Heavenly Devil Horde had died. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be so many deaths. Even a large-scale war wouldn't cause so many people to die at the same time. "Oh soul, come back!" In the time and space of the darkness, vibrations could be faintly felt. They were the miserable shouts of a devil god in another world as he chanted in a devil language. Qin Mu looked towards the source of the voice and could faintly see an 8-armed 4-headed devil god standing in the pitch-black space bawling. With a world between them, he couldn't see or hear him clearly. "It seems like Dutian Devil King is crying." Qin Mu was slightly stunned that the figure that's standing in the crumbling world was Dutian Devil King. His power was so great that the crumbling world couldn't confine his figure and voice. With the Dutian world between them, he called for the souls of his people, trying to summon those who had died back. "Oh soul, come back. Go not down to the land of darkness, where the 9 packs of Earth Count lie, in the dreadful horns on his forehead. He has a great humped back with bloody thumbs, pursuing men swift-footed. 3 eyes in his tiger's head, while his body is that of a bull. Oh soul, come back. lest you bring on yourself disaster. O soul, come back, and enter the gate of the city. Skilled priests call for you there, walking backward to lead you in. The treasured ship sailed forth, and Dutian Devil King's voice became softer and softer until Qin Mu could no longer hear what he was crying. The treasured ship left Dutian world, which was in the process of dying and because of which there were so many heavenly devil hordes people around. Qin Mu turned back and saw many paper boats floating into Yudu from Dutian world, and his heart became sorrowful. Maybe this would be the future of the world they were currently in as well. After some time, they came to another land in the darkness. Specks of divine light lit up the darkness hazily, revealing some life forms of Yudu moving about. The speed of the treasured ship gradually became slower, and the people in it could finally see what were those divine lights. They were the rays given off by the god statues in every village. Some of them were also given off by ancient ruins. The ship had traveled to great ruins. Qin Mu's heart stirred slightly. When nighttime came to great ruins, the place got connected to Yudu. There was a part of great ruins that was overlapped with Yudu. When night came, there would be life forms from Yudu coming out for activities. At that time, Yudu world was dominant, suppressing the real world. However, when the day came, the real world would overshadow Yudu world. In the darkness, wherever the rays shone upon was the real world, and each of the rays was the entrance to the real world. This meant that if they entered any village protected by the god statues or any ruins, they would be able to leave Yudu and return to reality. The aim of the treasured ship sailing to here had to have been to send them back to the real world. The speed of the treasured ship became slower and slower, so the passengers could finally see their destination. In front of them was an ancient ruin that was giving off astonishing rays, which forced the darkness back. There was also a majestic palace over there, but it was already dilapidated. Yet the majestic god statues were still giving off rays that lighted up the darkness. The treasured ship slowly stopped and floated into the sky above the ruins. Below it, there was many strange beasts lying prone as well as some passers-by that were getting along well with the strange beasts while avoiding the invasion of the darkness. They all raised their heads and looked curiously at this ship that had suddenly appeared above them. Qin Mu called the two white bats and the dragon Qilin to jump from the ship. Pan Gongzhou also had his retainers to jump off the ship. One of the shaman kings looked at Qin Mu and said with a flickering gaze, "Grandmaster." Pan Gongzhou shook his head. "We are now in great ruins, so we shall follow the rules of great ruins. Don't create additional troubles." Qin Mu raised his head to look at the ship with a complicated expression. The treasured ship slowly rotated and changed its direction before sailing out of the ruins and into the darkness. The man in the tree had to have driven the ship back into Yudu to look for his family. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 317. No Righteous Person. This is not Ghost Valley. Fu Yuchen looked around. The two white bats were slightly reserved as it was their first time leaving Ghost Valley. They wanted to hang upside down yet felt too shy to do it. Qin Mu raised his head to look at the dilapidated hall and roof over them before saying, "You guys can hang on the roof and take a break. Don't alarm the others. I'll bring you guys back to Ghost Valley tomorrow. Once we reach it, I'll give you guys the antidote." The two white bats let out sighs of relief and flew up silently. They hung under the roof, their hands crossed in front of their chest. Fu Yuchen opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "This brat lied to us. We were not poisoned at all." Fu Yuqiu was astonished. "We were not poisoned? Impossible. We were clearly in pain when the toxin flared up." Fu Yuchen rolled one of his eyes. "The toxicity should have been undone long ago. When he first gave us the antidote, he must have already undone the poison. The rest was just to scare us. Otherwise, we would have already died from poison after the passage of 2 months plus." Fu Yuqiu was furious. "This brat lied to us to get us to work for him. Let's eat him well done." Oh well, Fu Yuchen said. "Even if we hadn't allied with him, we still would have been chased by Pan Gongzhou and his lackeys. They wouldn't have let us off. By allying with the brat, we instead got to live on, so it isn't bad for us. It's also because of him that we know our old ancestors are still alive. Now our white bat race won't have to go extinct." Let's go back to wake our ancestors and have them give birth to girls for us. Fuyuki was excited. Give birth to 2 females. No, it should be a nest of females. I want to hug them left and right. Wait a minute. Brother, we are generations away from our old ancestors, so even if they give birth to 2 girls, in terms of seniority they would be our great-great-great-grandmothers, this seniority. Troubled expression filled the faces of the 2 white bats, and they could no longer fall asleep. In the ruins, Qin Mu leaned against the dragon Qilin's body to rest. There were over a dozen god statues guarding the place, and their rays lighted up the entire ruins. Qin Mu still didn't know where this ruin was located in Great Ruins. He would have to fly into the sky during the day to observe the surroundings. Only then could he determine his location. Pan Gongzhou took a glance at him, then also sat down. The dozen of great shamans, shaman kings, and the remaining few soldiers of barbarian D Empire that were lucky to be alive surrounded him. Qin Mu looked around and saw many strange beasts. There was no lack of strong existences among them, and their physiques were huge. They were even larger than the dragon Qilin in his full form. These people are slightly interesting. His pupils slightly contracted as his gaze landed on the bodies of some travelers. There were 3 groups of them, and one of them consisted of 3 eminent monks. They were rugged-looking, but they had kind gazes, even if there was a strong demonic air about their bodies. Little Thunderclap Monastery's monks. Qin Mu felt the demonic air about their bodies and immediately realized who they were. Little Thunderclap Monastery was a sacred ground, but it belonged to the demon race. Their head was revered as Little Rulai, and he was a junior brother to Old Rulai. He had exceptional abilities and had also achieved the realm of Rulai. Little Thunderclap Monastery was referred to as Little Western Paradise and was even more west than Great Thunderclap Monastery on Mount Meru. It was located on the westernmost side of Great Ruins. Since I can see the demon monks of Little Thunderclap Monastery, could we be at the west of Great Ruins? Qin Mu's heart sunk slightly. It was his first time going to such a far-off place, since Great Ruins was extremely vast. This place might be even farther away than Roland's Golden Palace. The second group of travelers only had 2 people, a man and a woman. They were both very young and looked like a married couple. There was nothing dangerous he could see about them. The 2 of them wore outfits of different tribes. The man had a white cloth wrapped around his head, revealing his black hair on the top of his head. On the other hand, the woman donned gold and silver, wearing numerous accessories made from those 2 metals and jade on her body. She had tied her head with a black head covering, and it hung down with her beautiful hair in front of her slightly bulging chest. There was also a little red flower fastened to the top of her head. Her hand was very fair. The sleeves of her shirt were quite short, revealing more than half of her small arm. It wasn't thick, yet there were over a dozen gold, silver, and jade bracelets of different thickness on her wrist. These 2 people were guarding a magnificent carriage of a very strange shape. Qin Mu had seen some magnificent carriages before, and most of them were very squarish. Some of them had a yurt top with an octagon top. The yurt top represented the square earth and spherical heavens, while the octagon top represented the 8 points of a compass. They were both symbols which signified status. This carriage, however, was circular, with a circular base and a circular top. The ornaments hanging around the carriage also had the feel of a different tribe. The third group of people was 100 divine arts practitioners. Their appearance and clothing were also of a different tribe. All their pupils were blue, but Qin Mu also didn't know from which country they came. These divine arts practitioners had murderous intent leaking from their eyes and would glance toward the young married couple and the carriage from time to time. "Cult Master, the atmosphere isn't right," the dragon Qilin said after opening his eyes secretly. "There are way too many spirit weapons on that woman's body, and the abilities of those divine arts practitioners are all very strong." Qin Mu raised his eyebrows. The eyesight of the dragon Qilin was indeed not bad. The gold, silver, and jade accessories that the woman was wearing were all spirit weapons. When Qin Mu glanced at them with his green heaven's eyes, each and every spirit weapon was giving off dazzling spirit ray, which showed that their power wasn't weak. To hang so many spirit weapons on her body, her abilities couldn't be weak. Pan Gong Tso had also noticed these people and gave instructions to two of the great shamans in a low voice. One of them immediately rose and went to the side of the young couple, greeting them before inquiring about their origins. He then came back to report. They said they are from True Heaven Palace of West Earth. They asked if we could assist them. True Heaven Palace of West Earth? Pan Gong Tso said. Since they are Qi refiners of West Earth's True Heaven Palace, we have no association with them and no need to guard against them. As for their matter, we won't help. The other great shaman also came back from inquiring and said, those divine arts practitioners are from True Heaven Palace. They wish we don't interfere with them. They are both from True Heaven Palace? Astonished, Pan Gong Tso smiled. It seems like an internal strife, so there's no need for us to bother with them. Those 3 demon monks are from Little Thunderclap Monastery, and there's some grudge between them and our Roland's Golden Palace, so we should guard against them. Roland's Golden Palace frequently captured humans and demons to cultivate and had quite a number of clashes with Little Thunderclap Monastery due to capturing quite a number of demon monks from there and using their souls to cultivate. The 3 monks also saw through the origin of Pan Gong Tso and his followers. They looked at each other, but they didn't make a move. Pan Gong Tso said in a low voice, since we met with people from Little Thunderclap Monastery and West Earth, it means that this place is in the west of Great Ruins. It shouldn't be too far from Little Thunderclap Monastery, so the 3 monks can't be left alive. After the sun rises, we'll get rid of them immediately. Everyone acknowledged. As for Cult Master Qin, he looked towards Qin Mu, who was currently rummaging through a Taotai sack. He sensed his gaze and raised his head to give him a radiant smile. He looked like a sunshine bright boy. The Taotai sack that Qin Mu was holding was that of Pan Gong Tso. He took out items from the inside and examined them over and over again, playing with each and every one of them. What a huge hammer! He raised a white bone huge hammer and gently swung it. Instantly, countless skulls came out from the huge skull on the top, spewing soul fire in all directions. Qin Mu shook it again, and the huge skull opened its mouth to suck the smaller skulls back into its mouth. There's actually also a sword pellet inside. Qin Mu returned the white bone hammer into the Taotai sack and took out a sword pellet. Once he executed it gently, countless fine swords that were like hair surrounded his palm. Cultivating to such a fine realm, your technique sure is profound. Is this the refining method of Dao Sec's Dao sword? Doesn't seem so. Qin Mu shook his head. Dao sword only needs 1 sword and that's it, old brother Pan. Your cultivation isn't there yet. No wonder your Dao sword is only so and not as good as that of Dao Master. Pan Gong Tso grunted and sneered. The Taotai sack you stole was merely a fraction of the wealth I have accumulated throughout all my lifetimes. He lowered his voice and instructed the shamans on his left and right. Tomorrow morning, you shaman kings shall get rid of the 2 white bats and that fat cat. The rest will work together to get rid of the Qin brat. Qin Mu checked the items in the Taotai sack before standing up and walking towards the 3 demon monks. He greeted them. Senior brothers. The 3 demon monks that had been meditating hurriedly got up to return the greeting. Senior brother. The 3 monks wore wide robes with large sleeves, but even though their robes were big, they still couldn't cover their legs, revealing razor-sharp talons and thick bird legs that were covered in feathers. Are the 3 of you from Little Thunderclap Monastery? Qin Mu asked. Does Little Rulai have a disciple that's a devil ape? His name in religion Kong? The 3 demon monks were astonished for a moment, then nodded. Senior brother, Rulai bestowed him the name in religion of Zhan Kong, and he's indeed Rulai's disciple. May I ask, how do you know Zhan Kong? Qin Mu smiled. I'm Heavenly Saint Cult Master, and he's my sworn brother, so I naturally know him. I see. The 3 monks let down their guards and smiled. One of them said, my name in religion is Ding Ju, and these are my brothers, Ding Ji and Ding Ming. We pay our respects to Heavenly Saint Cult Master. Qin Mu took a look at Pan Gong Tso and said, that youth is the Grand Master of Roland's Golden Palace and has 3 shaman kings beside him. 2 of them are on Celestial Being Realm and 1 of them is on Life and Death Realm. The 3 monks were shocked, their faces turning ashen. What can we do then? We are still not at Celestial Being Realm. We can't fight them. Qin Mu smiled. Don't worry. There's me. I'll bring you guys out tomorrow. Follow me. Let's rest over there. The three monks relaxed and followed him to Dragon Qilin's side. They immediately greeted him. Senior brother. The Dragon Qilin was already asleep, so he didn't bother replying. The three demon monks had good tempers, so they didn't take it to heart. They greeted the two white bats that were hanging from the roof as well. Senior brothers. The two white bats cupped their fists and returned the greeting. Senior brothers. Only then did the three demon monks sat down to continue meditating. Pan Gongtso saw the situation, and his face turned slightly black. He humphed to himself. Qin Mu asked with a pleasant expression, "Have the three of you heard of Heavenly Saint Cult before?" Ding Ju shook his head. "We have only moved around in great ruins, so we have not heard before." Qin Mu was ready to speak more when the male divine arts practitioner that was guarding the carriage walked over and bowed. "This senior brother." Qin Mu rose and returned his greeting before shaking his head. "Please hold your tongue." The divine arts practitioner asked in astonishment. "Senior brother? Why do you say so? You guys are being chased by these strong practitioners, having escaped to great ruins. I won't ally myself with you guys." Qin Mu shook his head. "They have too many people and not one of them is weak. I have enough trouble just protecting myself, so I would only be seeking death by allying myself with you. Please go back." The man revealed a disappointed expression and returned back to the carriage, saying something to it in a low voice. The voice of a little girl came from the carriage. "Mother, does that big brother not want to help us?" Another charming voice came from the carriage after a sigh. "There is not one righteous person in great ruins to save us mother and daughter." Qin Mu raised his eyebrows. "Righteous person? I'm definitely not a righteous person. I'm the heavenly devil cult master. If I don't do evil, people should already be celebrating. Yet they ask for me to still be a righteous person. Che, I only did good deeds when I was young and hot-headed. Now that I've grown up." The night seemed to pass by very slowly, with everyone in the ruins having different intentions. It was hard to say how much later a hen dragon flapped its wings among the strange beasts and rose to the roof of a dilapidated hall to crow toward the sky. Instantly, the darkness withdrew, and a ray of sunlight shone over from the east, hitting the mountains outside the ruins and lighting up the mountain peak. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 318, Paying Respect to the Soul. The sun had come out, so Qin Mu rose. He pushed Carefree's sword into the sheath he had carved yesterday. Giving a kick to the Dragon Qilin, he woke it up as well as the two white bats. The Dragon Qilin crawled up. His eyes were filled with vigor. "Cult Master, today's ration?" Qin Mu rummaged through his Taotai sack. He didn't have much of the Scarlet Fire Spirit pills left, but he still gave away the full meal. The two white bats let go of their purchases and fell to the ground from the roof. The three demon monks also opened their eyes and took out clear water and biscuits from their backpacks. Their biscuits were made from crushed insects. The monks of Little Thunderclap Monastery were of the demon race, so they weren't strictly vegetarian and didn't have as many rules as monks of Great Thunderclap Monastery. These three were bird-strange beasts, so they still liked eating insects. For the convenience of carrying them around, they had squashed them into biscuits. Ding Ju split half of the insect biscuit to give it to Qin Mu, and he gave it a try. The taste was actually not bad, fragrant and crispy. The crowd of beasts started to move, and the people in the ruins also began to follow the crowd out, each and every one of them on alert. Only Qin Mu was slightly absent-minded. This place was close to the west borders of Great Ruins, and he really wanted to see where the darkness disappeared. Since the darkness of Great Ruins flooded in from the west, that place had to be where it originated. If Qin Mu found it, he just might be able to find the source of Great Ruins' calamity. The beasts walked out of the ruin, and Qin Mu turned back to have a look. He saw that the carriage was also driving over, but he could no longer see the woman with the little red flower or the man with a white cloth wrapped around his head. He only saw two deers covered in plum blossom spots pulling the carriage. There was a white cloth wrapped around the buck's horns, while the ears of the doe were wrapped with a black cloth. There were gold and silver chains and pendants hanging in front of its chest. On its head, there was a little red flower, while its two front legs had over a dozen gold, silver, and jade bracelets. So they are demons. Qin Mu blinked. Yesterday, he hadn't managed to see that the married couple were a pair of strange beasts. There was no demonic air about these people's bodies, so he never expected that they would be two deers that had cultivated until they could change their shape into that of a human. This kind of technique is pretty extraordinary. It should be an orthodox cultivation technique. Are they guests from West Earth? Qin Mu thought to himself. When Qin Mu looked behind the two, he saw that the 100 divine arts practitioners followed silently behind the carriage. A small head with two braids popped out from it and took a look backward. Two fair hands then pulled the head back and closed the window of the carriage. Qin Mu retracted his gaze. While he sat on the back of the dragon Qilin, Carefree sword was ready to come out of the sheath at any time, while the flying swords in his Taotai sack were slowly stirring. The two white bats flew up silently and traversed the herd. In the meantime, the robes of the three demon monks fluttered as they moved a great distance every time their talons touched the ground. Pangong Tso's gaze flickered as he looked around. In the herd among them, there was no lack of abnormally strong strange beasts. There were also rules among the strange beasts, so if they were to attack now and agitate the herd, they would probably still get attacked by everyone. In time, the herd started to disperse. At that moment, the two deers pulling the carriage began to sprint, pulling the carriage away at a fast speed. Behind them, the 100 divine arts practitioners also sped up to give chase. Nai Kue, stop running, Nai Kue, in the Hmong language, means princess mother. Vital qi flooded out from the carriage, and numerous grasses and trees started to grow frantically, becoming incomparably long and thick. A forest that took up a hectare seemed to come alive. The ancient trees instantly pulled themselves out from the ground, becoming walking giants. When they lifted and landed their roots on the ground trembled. Then, the trunks changed into incomparably thick fists that blew every single one of the pursuers away. The trees in great ruins were very huge. Most of them were dozens of yards tall, but there was no lack of those that were as high as mountains as well. With the marvelous divine art of the woman in the carriage, these trees became even more gigantic in stature and gained boundless strength. The vines in the forest became akin to demons as they coiled around the divine arts practitioners in a snake-like manner, strangling them to death. Qin Mu's eyelids kept twitching from this sight. This kind of divine art was rarely seen and was slightly similar to Earth Aeon creation technique. However, it was even more overbearing. The earth trembled and the mountains shook as the tree giants wreaked havoc. However, the divine arts practitioners of the different tribe had good reaction speed, as they executed their own divine arts. Shrieks came out from the huge trees and vines, and white lights that seemed like spirits but were not spirits, as well as souls that were not souls, came flying out from the flora. The tree giants then collapsed, and the green vines withered. One of the divine arts practitioners waved his hand, and a mountain trembled and rumbled. Countless rocks rolled down in all directions, and the mountain transformed into a giant which swung its huge fist to smash the carriage. The doe in front of the carriage lifted both of her hooves, and the gold and silver bracelets on them flew out to bind the fist of the mountain giant, crushing it. The other fist of the mountain giant then came bombarding over, and the doe grunted. She stomped her feet, and countless green grasses grew frantically. They were like swords, stabbing into the gaps between the mountain rocks of the mountain giant. They planted their roots inside its body and sprouted, causing it to instantly break down into pieces and crumble. The two deers immediately put in a burst of speed to get the carriage away from there. What divine art is this? Qin Mu was astonished to no end. These people seemed to be borrowing the power of heaven and earth to strengthen the power of nature, transforming it into divine arts. This kind of action was different from what Eternal Peace Empire did, as well as the countries surrounding it. It's the divine arts of West Earth's true heaven palace, the dragon Qilin said in a low, muffled voice. I had gone to West Earth with Patriarch once, and true heaven palace is the sacred ground there. The divine arts over there are different from those in Middle Earth. They believe that all things have spirit and soul, even the grass, wood, rocks. In those people's eyes, all of these have their own spirits and divine treasures. Therefore, their path is of everyone and everything having spirit and soul. Patriarch said that they aren't bad at all. All things have spirit, all things have soul? Qin Mu exclaimed in admiration. The divine arts of West Earth had taken a different path from everyone and were indeed worthy of being learned. For the young patriarch to praise them being not bad meant that true Heaven Palace was indeed worthy to be called a sacred ground. Using divine arts to create a mountain giant was simply astonishing. A mountain just coming to life and becoming a giant to battle was simply world-shaking. This contained unimaginable attainments in regards to its force of destruction which widened Qin Mu's horizons. Its force of destruction is just too huge. Great Cult Master Qin became excited. I wonder if there are not yet demolished houses in West Earth. I'm afraid they wouldn't even have a single mountain, right? If I could learn this, it would be pretty good to tear down mountains to make roads. Attack! Suddenly, Pan Gong Tso gave an order, and everyone under him sprung into action at once. Knife pellets filled the sky, and countless sword lights came raining down on Qin Mu. At the same time, the three shaman kings also moved and cast shaman spells to bring the two white bats down from the sky. Qin Mu laughed loudly and raised his clothing up to vanish. In the next instant, he appeared beside the great shamans and soldiers of Barbarian D Empire. Once his carefree sword flew out, countless sword lights burst forth from his Taotai sack and shot off in all directions. Swoosh! 8,000 swords filled the ground and floated in an area of 300 yards. Blood continuously dripped off from the blades of the swords, when only two great shamans of Seven Stars realm had escaped unscathed. They withstood the countless sword lights and didn't get pierced through the heart. However, they had been frightened. Teleportation clothing? Pan Gong Tso was astonished. Qin Mu had made his move way too fast. By relying on the teleportation to come right next to them, he instantly unleashed his fatal move. With a raise of his finger, carefree sword flew up and countless sword lights swirled around it, slashing down towards one of the great shamans on Seven Stars realm. Golden wings appeared behind the great shaman's back and flapped repeatedly. Countless golden feather swords flew out and clashed with the attack. Qin Mu was suddenly overwhelmed and blown backward. As he did so, his clothing covered his body, and he vanished. The next instant, Qin Mu appeared behind that same great shaman, and his 5 fingers opened up, making carefree sword and the rest of the 8,000 swords was over. At this moment, Pan Gong Tso's body turned and he also vanished. The dragon Qilin and the 3 demon monks came sprinting over, and the 2 great shamans on Seven Stars realm rose into the sky. They were being chased by the 3 demon monks who shook their bodies to transform into 3 golden-winged doppangs that pounced toward them. The dragon Qilin opened his mouth to roar, and a pillar of fire shot towards Pan Gong Tso. He didn't dare to take it head-on, and his figure flashed, vanishing and appearing at the side of the 3 shaman kings. The 3 shaman kings were beating the 2 white bats furiously, but the 2 white bats could truly take a beating. Even as they were getting beat up by a shaman king on life and death realm and 2 on celestial being realm, they could still jump around. They truly had a thick skin. Gong Mu, you shall deal with these 2 white bats. The other shaman kings, kill those 3 bald donkeys. Pan Gong Tso said sternly. We have to get rid of them. Shaman King Gong Mu was a great expert on life and death realm, so he alone was enough to suppress the 2 white bats. Even though he couldn't beat them to death, he could prevent them from coming to support Qin Mu. 2 shaman kings on celestial being realm and 2 great shamans on Seven Stars realm were more than enough to kill 3 demon monks and the dragon Qilin, as the 4 of them had not yet cultivated to celestial being realm. Just as Pan Gong Tso said those words, he saw Qin Mu taking out a black jar from his Taotai sack, and his scalp couldn't help crawling. He shouted sternly, "Move back quickly!" He activated the teleportation spell, and his figure immediately vanished. Even though his cultivation had already reached 6 directions realm, he still couldn't teleport too far away. He could only cover about 2,000 yards. Pan Gong Tso turned back to look and saw that Qin Mu had already smashed the black jar. Incomparably dense black smoke started to spread in all directions and instantly covered an area of several hundred yards. Shaman King Mu and the other two shaman kings hurriedly rushed away and didn't get caught up by the black smoke. Yet, even after escaping with their lives, they couldn't help feeling a lingering fear. The corner of Pan Gong Tso's eyes twitched furiously. This was the shaman poison he had refined in his previous lifetime, and it had an extremely intense toxicity. If a soul or primordial spirit was tainted by it, the soul would corrode and the primordial spirit would rot. Even great experts on life and death realm would lose their lives and go to the Yellow Springs in a few breaths' time. Qin Mu's action of smashing the jar was clearly to drag everyone down and kill them together. That's not right. This black smoke isn't like the shaman poison I created. Pan Gong Tso's heart jumped. Even though this black smoke was similar to his shaman poison, he was an expert on shaman poison. He quickly saw through the trick and knew that the black smoke was just smoke and not shaman poison. It was obvious that the Qin rascal had not been lazing around yesterday night. He had to have created a black jar sneakily and made some black smoke to store inside it. He had 2 Taotai sacks, so if he had made something in one of them, no one would know what he was making. Crap, we were tricked. Pan Gong Tso's expression turned black, and he wanted to fight his way back. However, the 2 great shamans on 7 Stars Realm had already been gotten rid of by the 3 demon monks, while the 2 white bats had once again crawled up with vigor. He wanted to return to fight more, but then he saw Qin Mu taking out another black jar from his Taotai sack and couldn't help hesitating. Qin Mu laughed loudly and said in a clear voice, "Old brother Pan, farewell?" Pan Gong sneered and shook his sleeves. Looking at the 3 demon monks, he suddenly said loudly, "Monk Ding Ming!" The 3 golden-winged Dapengs lowered their wings and transformed back into 3 demon monks when they landed on the ground. They had the bodies of humans with bird talons while wearing the loose Buddhist robes. Monk Ding Ming raised his head and said, "Here." Pan Gong Tso bowed and paid his respect. Suddenly, an apparition of a devil appeared behind him which stood on a sacrificial altar. That devil also bowed and paid his respect. Monk Ding Ming gave a cry of astonishment, and his body couldn't help reverting back to its true form, the golden-winged Dapeng. Loud snapping sounds came from his body as his 3 souls and 7 spirits split. He then collapsed to the floor, dead. Qin Mu couldn't help feeling his skin crawl. Monk Ding Ming was a great expert on 7 Stars Realm, yet he had actually died from a pay of respect. This was the divine art that Grandmaster used to kill people after learning their name, the divine art that caused Butcher to not dare to reveal his true name. How do I counter this? While Qin Mu thought until this point, Pan Gong Tso, whose face was slightly pale, spoke up again. "Monk Ding Ji." Monk Ding Ji kept his mouth shut and didn't reply. Pan Gong Tso bowed to him nonetheless, and the apparition of the devil on the sacrificial altar also bowed. Monk Ding Ji then gave a loud cry and instantly died an unnatural death. Blood leaked out from the corner of Pan Gong Tso's mouth as he sneered. When he looked at Monk Ding Ju, the latter felt his skin crawl, and he spread his wings to fly away. "Ding Ju!" Pan Gong Tso paid his respect, and Ding Ju's souls and spirits dispersed in midair. The corpse of the golden-winged Dapeng fell from the sky. Pan Gong Tso spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at Qin Mu ruthlessly before turning around. "If you had not used a fake name, it would have been this easy for me to kill you." The 3 shaman kings immediately caught up with him and vanished into the forest. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 319, Family Matters. Qin Mu frowned. Pan Gong Tso was afraid of the shaman poison he had created himself, so he didn't dare to attack and could only retreat. However, the shaman spell he had used to pay respect to the soul when he was angry was indeed terrifying. Pan Gong Tso was still on 6 Directions Realm, yet experts on 7 Stars Realm had just died with just the paying of respect. The abilities of the 3 demon monks were very extraordinary, and they were strange beasts that had great success in their cultivation, yet that had helped them none. Golden Wing Dapeng was considered quite a well-known unusual breed in Great Ruins and had extremely strong abilities. Their corporeal bodies were tough, and by cultivating the Dharma of Little Thunderclap Monastery, their primordial spirits were stable. For someone to kill 3 golden-winged Dapeng in a row by just paying respects, The divine art was truly enough to make Butcher take strict precautions. In the past, Pan Gong Tso had some tolerance, giving off the demeanor of a great scholar. However, after suffering several setbacks under Qin Mu's hands, he was shamed into anger and no longer held back. This time, he killed 3 demon monks of Little Thunderclap Monastery by paying respects, but next, he would probably lay his hands on the people beside Qin Mu. Who would be able to take his respect? However, after Pan Gong Tso paid his respects to these 3 people, he seemed to have suffered heavy injuries as well. It's obvious that this divine art has an extremely great drawback and can't be used recklessly. Qin Mu's brows still didn't relax. Even though the drawback was great, such a divine art was still hard to deal with, impossible to guard against. Bury these 3 monks. We can't let their corpses be exposed to the wild. The few of them buried the corpses of the 3 golden-winged Dapengs, and Qin Mu paid his respects while sighing. Rest in peace. I shall burn Pan Gong Tso as an offering to you guys some other day. Let us go. Wait a minute. The dragon Qilin immediately halted, and Qin Mu shut his eyes. After a moment, he opened them and took out his brush, ink, inkstone, and paper. His vital qi burst forth and spread open the paper in midair. Stirring the ink with his brush, he painted in midair, and not long later, a picture of the devil standing on the sacrificial altar was painted by him. Qin Mu planned to put down the last stroke, but he stopped. He took out his seal to stamp on the painting and only then made the last stroke. The crux of Pan Gong Tso paying respect to the soul with the shaman spell should lie within this devil. Looking it up and down, Qin Mu ensured that he didn't draw it wrongly. Between the painting and calligraphy Def had taught him, painting had to pay particular attention to capturing the form, will, and grace. Qin Mu frequently went out of the village with him to collect local cultural materials and draw all kinds of stuff. Even though the devil behind Pan Gong Tso hadn't stayed there for a long time, Qin Mu had still captured its rough form and grace, painting the devil accurately. I don't recognize this devil, but there are all kinds of god and devil sculptures in Great Ruins. Village Chief Old Ma and the rest are more experienced and should recognize it. Since I'm already in Great Ruins, I should just return to the village and ask them. Even if they don't recognize it, there's still Heavenly Saint Cult and Eternal Peace Empire. Among all of them, there will be someone who will recognize it. Qin Mu put away the painting and thought to himself, as long as someone recognizes this devil, there will be a possibility to break Pan Gong Tso's shaman spell. Otherwise, I'll just have to get rid of him without caring for consequences. Not caring for consequences meant that he would have to attack Roland's Golden Palace. But before he could even lay his hand on this sacred ground, he would have to take down the prairie by eliminating all the countries there. The difficulty of this could be well imagined. Without any alternatives, the final way out would be to incite the Emperor to launch his troops on the prairie and raise Roland's Golden Palace, since Heavenly Saint Cult alone didn't have such an ability at the moment. The dragon Qilin took a step away, and Qin Mu called the 2 white bats back to treat their injuries. When they were healed, Qin Mu sprinted into the sky with the protection of the 2 white bats to survey the terrain. After a moment, he landed and frowned slightly. He didn't see Surging River. If he saw Surging River, he could determine his location, but without it, he had a hard time to determine his precise location with just the markings on the geographical map of Great Ruins. After walking 100 miles to the east, Qin Mu once again flew into the sky to survey the terrain, comparing it with the map in his memory. He did a few more times before finally determined their location from the path of the mountains. Our location is close to West Heaven Palace, not far from West Earth. Qin Mu determined his direction and let out a sigh of relief. Landing on the ground, he told the dragon Qilin the route. After another 100 miles east, Qin Mu reckoned they were close to the location where West Heaven Palace was marked on the geographical map of Great Ruins. Surveying his surroundings, he suddenly saw that the road was becoming more and more precipitous. A huge piece of land was stabbed diagonally in Great Ruins and was like a huge circular plate. It was much higher than the mountains surrounding it and seemed to have fallen from outer space. The dragon Qilin stopped in his footsteps, and Qin Mu looked at this huge piece of land. He saw that it was covered in dense vegetation and that there was a large ruin among the green plants. Where some parts of the land were cracked, the shine of metal could be seen. Deep underground, something made out of metal was buried. There were also some majestic god statues, some standing upright while some were collapsed on the ground. Qin Mu's group spent quite some time walking around this land, quite stunned. In front of them was a basin with scattered slabs of land. Some were stabbed into the ground, some were overturned, showing off a mountain's bottom, while some had split into a few pieces. There were also some slabs that had a complete ruin of a city. There were strange beasts moving inside them, the strong ones roaring in heart-stopping voices from time to time, threatening the life forms from other territories when they got near. Where the slabs of land had broken off, a long construction made out of metal was revealed. There looked to be pipes of different heights all around there. When wind blew across the basin, these metal constructions would hum in a tune which was actually melodious. How did such a magnificent civilization fall into such a state? After looking into the distance for a time, Qin Mu retracted his gaze. This should be a safe place that darkness couldn't invade, so there was an extremely large number of strange beasts in the surroundings. Qin Mu's group had to be extremely careful while passing through a place like this. If they took a detour, they would probably require a day to go around, so they could only continue forward. Qin Mu jumped down from the dragon Qilin's back and led the way personally. He had lived in great ruins ever since he was young, and so knew the habits of the strange beasts well. If he let the dragon Qilin or the two white bats lead the way, they would definitely cause some trouble. He entered deep into the basin, and Qin Mu suddenly saw the ruts of a carriage. The ruts had to have been left behind by that carriage of West Earth's true heaven palace. There were also some messy footsteps which should have been left behind by the divine arts practitioners giving chase. They had obviously barged into this place in a hurry, but looking from their tracks, these people had to know the rules of great ruins well since they didn't take the wrong path. However, the divine arts of West Earth's true heaven palace were pretty unusual as their scale and activity were all very large in scope. If they were to make their moves here, it would be easy for them to anger the territorial strange beasts. If we take the same path as them, we might get implicated. Qin Mu wanted to find another path, yet what could he do when this was the only safe path across this basin? If he was to take a detour, he would have to go through a huge pool. He looked toward that huge pool, and the water in it suddenly churned. A huge crocodile man rose up and stood on the water's surface. With smoke spewing out from his nose, he sharpened his already razor-sharp claws. This territorial strange beast wasn't good to provoke, so if Qin Mu took a detour through there, he would be seeking death. On the other side were the ruins of a city. It had as many majestic shrines as there was hair on a cow, and numerous red-crowned and black-necked cranes were flying around it. They danced in the sky and looked very peaceful. However, in the city, there were two huge, male and female, cranes practicing their sword moves. As their wings vibrated, countless sword lights filled the sky and lined up into a circle. From the movement speed of those sword lights, Qin Mu felt that these two crane leaders were even more dangerous than the crocodile leader. There's only this path. Qin Mu let out a shaky breath and muttered under his breath. We cannot interfere with the family matters of West Earth's true heaven palace. I'm not someone who likes fighting and poking my nose into other people's business. We will just walk around them. The center of the basin was very bustling, with 4 rhinoceroses that had thick bone armor walking around. Their bodies were snow white, without a speck of impurity. Their little eyes glanced at Qin Mu and the dragon Qilin behind him in alert, as well as the white bats that were flying to and fro and hanging themselves on the trees continuously. One of the female rhinoceroses spoke up in a human language. This huge dog is so fat that it had become a pig, yet it is actually still able to walk. The rhinoceroses in the lead had an ashen face and immediately rolled on the ground, transforming into a giant with the head of a rhinoceros and a human body. Underneath his bone armor was bulging muscles, and he put his front hoofs forward while saying to Qin Mu, "Dao friend, my old wife likes to spout nonsense. Please don't take it to heart." Qin Mu smiled. "No worries. Fatty Dragon is indeed a little fat." The rhinoceros leader let out a sigh of relief and brought the 3 female rhinoceros to leave immediately while grumbling, "Can't you see it? These fellows are all ruthless characters. Every one of them is fiendish, especially that human and the two white bats, having so many souls of the dead circling around them. Qin Mu was astonished, and the dragon Qilin said, "People say that white rhinoceroses are psychic, that they are able to see the netherworld as well as the souls of the dead. It's truly remarkable. However, they are still wrong in their judgment. I'm not a huge dog, nor am I fat. I'm sturdy." The sound of divine arts and spirit weapons clashing against each other came from up ahead. It sounded very lively over there. Qin Mu called the two white bats over and carefully walked forward. They didn't walk far before a battlefield opened up in front of their eyes. The strong practitioners of True Heaven Palace were surrounding the carriage, all of their bodies already covered in wounds. When those divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace saw their arrival, they suddenly stopped attacking. Instead, they turned their heads to look at them without moving. "Dao friend." A youth came out from the crowd and greeted Qin Mu. "Family matters." Qin Mu returned the greeting. "I'm only just passing by." The youth revealed a smile and waved his hand. "Open a path and let them pass." Qin Mu smiled and nodded to both sides to show his intention before bringing the dragon Qilin and the two white bats over. In front of them, they saw that the carriage was already shattered in pieces, the wheels and roof destroyed. One of the plum blossom deers sat beside the broken carriage while the other was in its true form. This should be because it was too injured and could no longer keep up its human shape. The mother and daughter that the two deers were protecting had come out from the carriage. The woman was covered in blood and gasping for breath as she protected the child behind her. Righteous person. The man that had transformed from the buck suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed the corner of Qin Mu's shirt. He raised his head with difficulty, hanging onto the last of his breath. "Righteous person, could you please?" Qin Mu pulled his shirt free and broke away from his grasp to continue walking forward. He passed by the doe and was slightly stunned. He saw that she was already dead, without any more breath left. Qin Mu pulled his gaze back and continued to walk forward. Suddenly, the woman who was referred to as Nai Kui grabbed his hand and looked at him hopefully while pleading in a hoarse voice, "Take my child, just let her live." Qin Mu paused, and the youth from True Heaven Palace behind him shouted, "Dao friends, these are the family matters of our True Heaven Palace." Qin Mu broke free from the woman's grasp and continued to walk forward. He smiled at the divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace on both sides and led the dragon Qilin and the two white bats out of the battlefield. The dragon Qilin caught up to Qin Mu in a few steps and turned his head to look at his face. He hesitated before saying, "Cult Master." Qin Mu was expressionless as he said, "It's other people's family matters, so we shouldn't interfere. It's good not to interfere. Patriarch said that you like to create trouble, but it looks like you have grown up." Qin Mu stared blankly ahead. "Grown up? This is growing up. You understand how to weigh the pros and cons, so you have naturally grown up. You have become rational," the dragon Qilin explained. "You were very irrational in the past, fighting here and there, not fearing to offend anyone. During those few months, Patriarch had to clean up a lot of your messes." Qin Mu fell silent as shouts came behind him. "So this is growing up. I don't want to grow up then." Qin Mu burst into laughter and continued walking forward. Small swords came flying out silently from his Taotai sack and stabbed in his surroundings. More and more flying swords landed on the ground and laid a sword formation. He continued walking forward, and the 8,000 swords continued to enter the ground in front of him. Sword treading mountains and rivers, the swords actually formed the shape of mountains and rivers by stabbing themselves into the ground. With a ding, the final sword landed. Qin Mu stopped and pressed his hand down. The 8,000 swords went underground in unison, and he suddenly covered himself with his clothing, vanishing without a trace. "I, your father, am not willing to become an adult like this." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 320, Right and Wrong. Nai Kue. So what if you escape to great ruins? The youth had his hands behind his back and looked at the other divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace attacking the woman protecting the little girl. With a calm expression, he said, "You guys have already lost and True Heaven Palace now belongs to the you. Don't blame me for being heartless. There's a good saying in Middle-earth. If the roots are not removed during weeding, the weeds will grow back up when the winds of spring begin to blow. True Heaven Palace no longer belongs to your Xiong family. Their current place was considered to be the remains of Great Ruin's West Heaven Palace. So the practitioners of True Heaven Palace had to be careful in executing their divine arts here. What they cultivated was the idea that all things had souls and spirits. Mountains had mountain spirits, water had water spirits, grass, trees, and wild beasts had their own spirits as well, with no one being an exception. There was nothing that couldn't become a divine art. Because of that, they naturally had sharp senses in regards to nature, and in the remains of Great Ruin's West Heaven Temple, they could feel a danger. Everything here contained immense power, as if there were ancient gods lying asleep somewhere below. Their divine arts could awaken all things in the world to fight for them. But if they awakened the gods in this land, they would only bring great danger upon themselves. The power of West Heaven Palace wasn't a power they could control. Therefore, they had to be careful not to stir up this imposing but for the time being lying dormant power. Luckily, they had all refined their own spirit weapons. They were different from the spirit weapons of Eternal Peace Empire's divine arts practitioners, however. Most of them were in the shapes of grasses, trees, mountains, flowing water, and white clouds. There were also strange beasts that had been refined into spirit weapons by them, so after they activated their vital qi, the bodies of the tiny strange beasts would swell up by 10,000 times and swallow living humans, which was very unusual. Thus, even if these people couldn't use their divine arts, they could easily get rid of the couple escapees. With one of the plum blossom deers dead and the other one heavily injured, the woman would have to protect her child by herself. She wouldn't be able to move and avoid their attacks, only able to stand there and hold on against their beating. The woman vomited blood and collapsed on the ground. Yet she soon crawled up to her feet to continue protecting the little girl. Traitor! The man flew up and revealed his true form, transforming into a huge buck to face the attacks from the crowd while shouting sternly, Palace Master had treated you guys well, yet you guys took the chance when Palace Master passed away to rebel. Where's your conscience? Why are you still being so ruthless? Bang, bang, bang. In an instant, countless attacks landed on his body, and he was killed up in the sky. Before he died, though, he tried his best to swing his huge antlers out to stab at the youth. The abilities of the two deers were extremely brilliant, not in any way inferior to those of the dragon Qilin. It was only a pity that there were too many people on the other side and they could only meet with such a miserable end. Over a dozen divine arts practitioners rose into the sky and grabbed onto the branches of the antlers. The dozen or so people landed on the ground, yet they still couldn't stop the force from the swing of the antlers and were pushed back. The soil and rocks under their feet overturned, and the antlers continued to crash towards their target. The youth was unmoved and sneered. Xiong family has dominated True Heaven Palace for so many years that it should be time to give up the position of the Palace Master. Blood must be seen when killing a person and weeds must be uprooted. If your Xiong family isn't extinguished, our Yu family will have to worry about you guys making a comeback. In front of him, a puppet-sized strange beast suddenly swelled up and gave a world-shaking roar as it beat its chest with both of its hands. It grabbed the antlers that were crashing over with both of its hands, and the antlers came to a stop. Ba-thump. The corpse of the buck landed beside the doe. The youth laughed and said, Kill Nai Kuei and the little princess, so we can go back and finish our mission. The divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace walked up, and their spirit weapons flew into the air. The woman gave them a dark look and turned to hug the little girl in her arms while saying in a gentle voice, Little darling, it's going to be fast. Mom, can we meet Grandpa and Grandma? The woman's heart trembled. We can. What about Dad? The little girl's eyes were sparkling as she asked. The woman shed tears when she said, We will meet him. The little girl calmly consoled the young married woman. Mom, I'm not scared, so you don't cry either. I miss Grandpa and Grandma. Before Dad died, he looked so scary, covered in blood. He made me cry from shock, but I think he will be smiling when we see him later. Whoosh! The spirit weapons transformed into spirit trees and strange beasts in the sky, then pounced at them. But just as they were about to land on them, A ray of light flashed by and Qin Mu appeared in front of the mother and daughter. When he spread out his arms, the embroidered gown on his body automatically flew out in front of him. The youth gave a smack with his palm on the embroidered gown, and Qin Mu's arms swirled. The embroidered gown rotated, becoming larger and larger, transforming into a gown that had a radius of over 30 yards. The spirit weapons of True Heaven Palace crashed into this embroidered gown and got wrapped up, after which they vanished along with the gown. Afterward, 300 yards away from them, countless sword lights shone as 8,000 swords moved in unison, slashing the spirit weapons and the embroidered gown into pieces. The divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace were astonished as they lost their connection to their spirit weapons. Among them, there was no lack of strong practitioners on Celestial Being Realm whose spirit weapons were extremely powerful. Yet even these were sliced into pieces. Everyone wanted to move forward to attack, but the youth hurriedly stopped them and probed, "Dao friend, these are the family matters of our True Heaven Palace." Qin Mu felt his heart in pain as he thought about his embroidered gown. It had been bribed by him from Incense Master Chu and Venomous Insect Hall Master in Secret Waters Pass. Ever since it was tailored, it had saved Qin Mu from harm several times. Furthermore, his teleportation formation markings were imprinted on that embroidered gown. Now that it had been destroyed along with the spirit weapons of True Heaven Palace's strong practitioners by his sword treading mountains and rivers, how could his heart not be pained? I should have known there would be nothing good from doing good. What a great loss. Qin Mu squeezed out a smile. How do I address this little brother? Yu Buochuan of True Heaven Palace's Yu family. The young master was full of smiles, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring wind. He said, "Dao friend must have felt pity when seeing an orphan with a widowed mother. Therefore, you wanted to save them. However, you don't know that this mother and daughter have done much evil, killing countless people in their daily lives. Our West Earth's True Heaven Palace placed righteousness before family, so I was ordered to lead everyone to come and annihilate them." Qin Mu nodded solemnly. "So I see. I'm the one being reckless. May brother you pardon me." That youth Yu Buochuan smiled. "One who does not know is not guilty. May senior brother please give us face and let us finish this difficult mission. To kill these two rebels, we have already lost countless brothers." Qin Mu put on a righteous face and said, "Your matters are of course important, but I can't just take your word for it. I still need to ask them if they are like what you have said." Yu Buochuan smiled with a pleasant look on his face. "Dao friend, I've already given you a ladder to step down, so don't fail to appreciate my kindness." Qin Mu also smiled with a pleasant expression. Heavenly Devil Cult Master doesn't need anyone to give him a ladder to step down. If it's truly like what you have said, I'll just turn and leave, and you guys can continue to deal with your traitors. No need for that. Yu Buochuan raised his hand and instructed those to his left and his right. "Kill him and finish the mission." Understood. Most of the Qi refiners acknowledged the command in unison and leaped towards Qin Mu. He laughed loudly and turned around to run after picking up the mother and daughter. One of the strong practitioners of Celestial Being Realm shouted out angrily, "Can you even run?" A towering tree appeared behind him, its roots like coiling green dragons. This was his primordial spirit. The cultivation method of West Earth's True Heaven Palace was also different from that of Eternal Peace Empire. The primordial spirits of Eternal Peace Empire's strong practitioners were usually split into Green Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Tortoise. Once someone cultivated to Celestial Being Realm, their primordial spirit would appear behind them and usually be one of the 4 great spirit bodies after God transformation, which was similar to the 4 kinds of stone statues in Disabled Elderly Village. Even if there was a difference, it wouldn't be a huge one, since they all belonged to the 4 major types. The primordial spirits of True Heaven Palace's strong practitioners were peculiar. Even though that strong practitioner on Celestial Being Realm belonged to the Green Dragon bloodline, his primordial spirit looked like a tree, which was rarely seen. The roots and branches of the huge tree flailed like green dragons dancing in the sky, spreading towards Qin Mu's back. Their speed was extremely fast, and rays of green lights flashed across the sky. Even though Qin Mu was carrying 2 people, his movements were extremely fast. Like flickering lights and passing shadows, his speed surpassed the speed of sound and exploded with a thunderclap. Cripple's heaven-pilfering divine legs was considered to be the #1 movement skill in the whole world. But Qin Mu was still on 6 Directions realm and couldn't execute it to Cripple's standard. Furthermore, the abilities of the strong practitioners on Celestial Being realm were simply too strong. The roots caught up to Qin Mu in a blink of an eye and stabbed towards the back of his heart. Yet at that moment, sword lights burst forth once again in the surroundings, and the 8,000 swords rose up like a storm again, instantly unscrolling a picture of mountains and rivers behind Qin Mu. Endless sounds of collision rang out as the swords slashed at the roots and branches that were trying to pass through. The power of sword picture was extraordinary, and in addition to that, Qin Mu's swords were all made from the best materials. Because of that, there were quite some roots and branches of the divine tree primordial spirit that got chopped off. However, Celestial Being Realm was still Celestial Being Realm. The divine tree primordial spirit crashed over with a world-shaking rumble. Sword picture instantly crumbled, and the 8,000 swords flew off in all directions. "Fatty dragon!" Qin Mu shouted out loudly. The dragon Qilin came sprinting over from the front, but even though his speed was very fast, his speech was very slow. "Cult Master, you've created trouble again." The body of the dragon Qilin became larger and larger until it collided with the divine tree primordial spirit. True fire blazed around his body, and the flames with extremely high temperature burned down the divine tree primordial spirit. The Celestial Being Realm's strong practitioner immediately called back his primordial spirit, and a burly man wearing a lined jacket rushed forth with heavy footsteps. Behind him, a rock giant appeared, which was his mountain god primordial spirit that had boundless strength. With a punch, he sent the dragon Qilin flying. The dragon Qilin tumbled back in midair. Because he was too fat, he couldn't help when he couldn't control the fire clouds. Thus he immediately pulled himself into a ball and shouted out, "Fu brothers!" The 2 white bats flapped their wings to fly over and let out silent sound waves from their mouths. Those sound waves turned the pursuers into a complete mess. The dragon Qilin crashed onto the ground and pulled out his head before shaking it. He roared in anger. "I had called you guys to catch me." The 2 white bats flew around nimbly to avoid the attacks from below, until they grabbed 2 guys and went to hang upside down on a tree, hugging their victims to drink their blood. Yet the tree ended up transforming as it was the primordial spirit of another strong practitioner, binding the 2 white bats securely. Qin Mu took out a huge white bone hammer and shook it gently. In an instant, countless skulls came out from the eyes, ears, mouth, and nose of the white skull, filling the entire sky. The skulls squeaked weirdly and pounced forth, shuttling among the crowd and biting whoever they found before tunneling into their bodies. The dragon Qilin rushed over again and spewed out blazing true fire towards the green tree primordial spirit, saving the 2 white bats. Yu Buochuan saw the situation and immediately shouted out, "Retreat! We can't execute our skills here. We'll have to fight them outside."